Granted, this is episode number 3,
Right.
but haven't needed to do serious editing yet. So I guess with that, welcome to Round the Campfire, episode 3
Thank you.
with Brandon St. Jules.
Early in the episode count.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing we'll do is go through I'll introduce our guest, Brandon St. Jules, and then we'll go through sort of a topic overview of sort of things we might hit, and then we'll just jump into it. Does that sound good?
Yep, sounds great.
Cool. So for the introduction, this is kind of an interesting thing for me because you and I worked together for a long time, for 7.5 years. You were at Workiva when I started at Workiva. You'd already been there, and you're still there now that I've left. And despite working together for quite a long time, you and I never really got a chance to spend a lot of time just talking and hanging out. And so as I was sort of like doing the whole like, well, what's the introduction for Brandon here? I'm looking at my details and I'm like, damn, I don't know Brandon real well. We'll go through what I know, and then I'm really looking forward to, in this one, getting to know you better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Brandon St. Jules, you are an engineering manager, senior engineering manager, correct? Yep. At Workiva. You live in the Sault Ste. Marie, Canada, or the Sault as locals refer to it. Really cool place. I actually kind of miss it. It's funny, like in all the travels, like all the places I've been, Andrew Underwood and I, someone that you also know and someone we both worked with, we got the chance to travel there a couple of times, and it's like the most unexpected place to miss. Like we have good memories there, even though it's just like this small little border town. It's a cool place. It was a tangent, sorry. Yeah, live in the Sault. You have a degree in computer science from Algoma University.
Yep.
Before working at Workiva, you worked at a company called Syntec. Let's see. You've been at Workiva now for almost 10 years. Is that right? You're coming up on 10 years?
November 12th is 10 years.
Yeah. On the personal side, I know that you have a partner and a daughter.
Yep.
And no other kids, right?
Nope.
Okay.
Just my partner Christy, and my daughter's 8 now. That flew by, Aria. So.
And I know that you are a very good cook, though I've never tried your cooking. Your reputation precedes you there.
Yep.
And
I love to cook. Love to cook for friends. Love to cook for family. We might get into this later, but I'll never do it for money again. But I did pick up a lot of those skills cooking for money.
Yep. And you're really into video games, as am I. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. For a long time, I think I identified as like a gamer first. So.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, and that's sort of like some of the topics then we'll cover are sort of pulled from that. So as an idea of like topic overviews, obviously the question that I ask everybody is one that I'll ask you too, and I'll want to get into that, which is like your background, your superhero origin story, pivotal moments in your life. And then I want to talk about leadership and tech leadership. I know this is a shared passion of ours. So I think that'll be really interesting to talk through some areas there. And then some topics that you're very passionate about. So sort of what is the definition of a utopian workspace, like your workplace, making our workplace better. And then we can talk about esports and Starcraft and the content creator economy. And then another note here about sort of like what it means to have a mentality around helping people first, and like balancing that against being taken advantage of by the small percentage of people that are bad actors in the system.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds great.
So with that, tell me your superhero origin story.
All right. So definitely from the Sault Ste. Marie.
Like born and raised?
Like you said, born and raised. Well, kind of. So I'll get into that. So small border town, right? Population around 70,000. I actually grew up 30 minutes north until I was 20. I grew up 30 minutes north of Sault Ste. Marie in a little place called Goulet River. Population about 3,000.
Okay.
I went to elementary school with the exact same uh, 28 kids from JK until grade 8. There was some change, but basically it was like just a core group, right? So like those were your friends.
Yeah.
We had 4-digit phone numbers because everything was 649 and then whatever your 4 digits. So if you said like what's your phone number, might just be 2370,
Yeah.
right? And that's all I knew.
And everybody assumed the part in
Yeah,
front of it.
everyone, yeah, you
Yeah.
just knew,
Yeah.
right? So grew up out there, and then just normal kid, played a lot outside. I played a ton of hockey. I actually played like house league mostly. I got like 1 or 2 years of competitive, but never like really traveling or anything like that. But
For
love playing hockey.
non-Canadians, can you explain the leagues and like house league and what the
Yeah.
so what's
So
the like significance of house league?
so house league was just it's just like local. So you play in a league, you get drafted every year, and then you play against like 6 to 8 other teams within the same league, and that's kind of your whole season. You do practice and games, and it's just kind of round robin, and then you have like playoffs at the end of it. Um, House league, so that would be like it's all graded on letters, so that's like usually like B, uh, and then double A would be like maybe you represent Sault Ste. Marie in Ontario, right? And then triple A would be like you represent Sault Ste. Marie, or maybe you represent Ontario, like internationally.
Okay.
So I played mostly B League. I got right around like 15, 16. I played 2 years of double A, and that was like really intense. That was when we were doing like dry land training in the summer, practicing. Like you were doing like strength training and conditioning, not just practicing on the ice. And like you would spend time explicitly with your line mates, right? So that was really interesting. But that's one of the things that kind of took me out of Goulet, right? We didn't have a league in Goulet, so I had to drive into the Sioux. So I have a ton of sympathy for my parents when we'd have like a 6 a.m. practice, right?
Yeah.
Because you got to get up at 4:30, you got to be there in time to get dressed. Half-hour drive, middle of winter, all the time. But that was pretty much everything I did. Very outdoorsy, very like snow machines, 4-wheelers, fishing, hunting, camping, all that stuff. And then when I was 10, my parents got sick of buying. No, I must have been 12. Yeah, but my parents got sick of buying new consoles. So we got the Nintendo in like 88, 89. Got the Super Nintendo in 92, and then uh, 96 got an N64, and my house got broken into, and they stole the N64, right? So then we didn't have a console. I was still playing a ton of Super Nintendo, whatever it was. But then that Christmas, my parents are like, "Hey, we got you. This is for the family or whatever." Open it up. It was for the family, but it ended up being 100% for me, and it was a IBM Aptiva, like a Pentium 120, 16 megs of RAM, like
Nice.
super old. But that kind of they said, yeah, this will do better than any of the consoles now. And like from that moment, I didn't own a console until like my PS4. I think I was a PC gamer.
Yeah.
Right. I lived with people who had consoles. I played on them and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But it was never like my mainstay. And I particularly remember like getting into tech. I played like all the games that came with it. There's a bunch of kids games. There was like MechWarrior 2. It was a ton of fun. And then I got really into the game Diablo.
Yep.
I'm getting to my origin story around
The original Diablo, right?
The original Diablo.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
No, all this is good, and I have questions,
Yeah.
but I'll hold on until.
Yeah. And my friends could play that, and we could spawn copies, and then we could all play together. And then my neighbor's like, "Hey, you know the company that made Diablo?" I'm like, "Sure, like Blizzard or something." They're like, "Yeah," and they're like, "Well, they have a new game, and you have to try it." I'm like, "Okay, well, what is it?" Like, it's Starcraft. I'm like, "Okay." So I go over to his house, and he's just like, "Yeah, no, like it's top down, so it's not like you're not killing demons, but try the first mission."
So
right?
you'd never played Warcraft before?
I'd never played
Starcraft?
Warcraft. No, I'd never played an RTS anything before.
And you call yourself a gamer?
And yeah, I'll get that. So we sat there, And he's like, well, try it out. And it's like, okay, well, you just build. So I'm like, okay, so you build this, and then you get this. Oh, so that unlocks this. So like, yeah, but you don't get that till later mission. I'm like, okay. And then his parents are like, Aaron, it's time for supper. I'm like, okay, can I borrow this until like just till after supper? He's like, I guess. I like wouldn't give it back. Like, so anyway, on it, what you could do, you couldn't play the campaign, but you could spawn a copy that allowed you to play multiplayer locally or with them on Battle.net.
Because this was back in the day when you had to have the disc in the drive
Yeah,
in order to play the game.
yeah.
But
And the CD
by
key,
spawning a copy, you could play the multiplayer version without having the CD in the drive.
yeah, and you could only play with whoever you spawned from.
Yeah.
So it had to be the same CD key.
Yep.
31310802174669.
This is like people remember their phone number as a kid. You're like, I remember this serial key for Starcraft. I love it.
So anyway, and you could, and from the spawn, you could load the campaign editor.
Okay.
Right. And that was just something like people mostly used it just to make maps, like other maps for the game. That's kind of what the intent was. But then inside of it, it had everything that they used to build the campaign, right? All of the tools.
The triggers
so they built
and macros and things like that. Yeah.
The company builds a campaign editor first, then they use that exact tool to build the whole campaign, right? So you have all those tools. And it just unlocked for me. I was doing like, well, when Unit A reaches beacon B, you can have this happen, right? But then whatever that task was, you could spawn other tasks. So it was like subroutines almost, but like it suddenly unlocked because you could only have 128 triggers. But if like 18 of those were basically macros, right? All of a sudden you had all this power, right? So that's kind of like what unlocked like programming for me, like really liking like systematically like working through and like doing like we didn't have great tools. My computer was super slow. So I did like a lot of like flow charts, right? Like just like logic charts, like basically finite state machines. But that was a ton of fun. And then eventually I got my parents to get me StarCraft and I was obsessed. Like I would say like I was, the StarCraft guy from grade 8 all the way through high school. So like I call myself a gamer, but I'm like a StarCraft gamer. Like I missed Half-Life. Like I had people telling me like this is an amazing game. I'm like, yeah, but I could be playing more StarCraft. I would play like Warcraft 3 when it came out, and then I'd eventually go back to StarCraft. I played WoW for a bunch, and I'd go back to playing like the original StarCraft. And I was trying to explain to people in like 2002, 2003. I'm like, no, like there's like TV channels in Korea where they just play this game like nonstop, like start to finish. And it was it culminated in like everyone just kind of played the game. There was no like profession around it yet, like outside of Korea. And I watched a lot of their games. So because of that, like I had a build order. I wasn't good at it. I wasn't as fast as the Koreans, but like in Canada, I was pretty good.
Yeah.
And in 03, I competed in WCG locally. Ended up like traveling for like the first time playing online, and was like 5th. Like it was top 10 somewhere in that bracket. Didn't go to the finals, but it was in like the round of 8.
Damn.
Yeah, ton of fun. I would go to high school and I would like. I mean, I was a teenager, so I was super cocky. And I go and I'd be like,
"You're like I'm hot shit." Because
I would hand them a paper with my build order on it. I'm like, okay, like this I'm gonna go 12 hatch, 11 pool, 15 third hatch, then I'm gonna go up to 5 hatch, and I'm gonna kill you with hydralisks.
And I'm
telling you exactly what's coming.
You were always a Zerg player.
Yeah.
Fair to assume that when you say original StarCraft, you're including like that Brood War, like the expansion, right? Yeah. Because I didn't know if you were like if there is, I assume there is like a purist strain out there. People that are like, no, I don't recognize Brood War as part of original.
I think it's super small because even Blizzard came out when they released Brood War, and they're like, this is the game we wanted to release, but the publisher said we had to release a game in '98, right? Because it was June '98 that StarCraft came out, and it was like March of the next year that Brood War came out. Like it wasn't like
Wasn't
There
that
wasn't much
long.
time in between them, and the game's it's completely broken. Like if you want to play competitively, you can't play the original.
Mm. Yeah.
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 Anyway, that's
So
like
tell me, like, aside from being a core part of your identity, uh, especially in formative years, um, what what would you say you took from that? Like, what parts of like traits or behaviors or like how has that impacted your development as a human? Like, what part did that play in your life story, aside from just like
yeah.
taking up
Well,
so much of the your attention?
so it's a good question, and I appreciate it because it's weird sometimes to think about that for a video game, right? But I have thought about it, and like to break it down, like there's one, like I said, I had a build order, right? That made me good at that. Research, right? You could go, you could read, you could figure out there was an optimal way to do things. You didn't have to reinvent the wheel every time, and that's why, like right through to my career now, like I'm constantly reading um, management books, advice from other people, and it's realizing that like even though a lot of people have advice, there's also in StarCraft like the meta is always changing, right? So what worked in 2002 isn't going to work in now, right? And it won't work. Probably whatever's working right now won't work in the league next year, right? So yes, do research, right? Try it. Maybe take the lessons you learned from it, but then you always have to put your own spin on it, or else, um, if you're just copying what other people do, when you do the research and you just copy what they do, you're always going to be like um, a less good version of whoever you're copying. Whereas if you
Yeah.
take it, you're like, okay, what from this works for me, right? How can I incorporate that into what I'm doing? And I might read like I think about it now. That really informed like now I might read like these are the top 10 things you should do to be a better manager, and maybe like number 6 really speaks to me, and I can work that into my workflow, and I don't need to take their whole framework, right? It's like no, like this makes a ton of sense, this resonates with me, I'm going to try this particularly solves a problem I'm having right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first was research. The second was um, you could. It was really something that like we're taught as kids, but it really struck home. Like practice makes perfect. You can work harder and achieve better results. There's no like natural talent only takes you so far. Ultimately, sometimes you need to build muscle memory, and that might be like a routine in your day, or it might be like a build order in StarCraft or anything like that. But it was like you could outwork your opponents, you could out research your opponents, and um, those are really like what I think ultimately like led me to leadership. And I'll get to some of this, but it was like as I was reading through the topics for this, I thought about like even at my first job, you know what I mean? Um, I worked at gas station uh, further north, and we took care of everything. We changed the garbages, we would clean the windshields of cars, we'd pump their gas, we'd sweep the parking lot, we'd change all the garbages inside. Once a week, we'd take all the garbage cans we had and we'd bring them up to the dump with the boss. Basically, we were like clean the bathrooms. We were like maintenance men and gas pumpers. And like on the first day, it was just like um, we were moving wood from outside to inside, just because we had moved the fireplace inside so that we could keep the place warm. And when we were done, I just looked at it and I'm like, okay, well, I'll go get a broom because there's wood everywhere. And that was like the first time the boss was like, who are you? And it's like, oh, I'm Brandon. Like, this is my first day. It's like, yeah, but that's initiative, like you're going to be a leader someday or whatever. And this guy was like crazy, but he was also, he was also like informative, like more of that, like hard work pays off and you just need to kind of do it. And that job was intense when I think about it now, and I think about like what other first people's jobs were. But we did 7 days on, 7 days off, and you
Wow.
started and you slept at the place because it was even further north than where I lived, so it's about an hour out of town, and it's kind of like a tourist trappy
Okay.
destination. Yeah, and you would 6 a.m. was wake up call, which was an air raid siren. That's how he woke everyone up. You didn't have your own alarm clock. He woke you up in your bunks, and then you had a half hour to get up, shower, brush your teeth, 6:30 was breakfast. They fed us, so we had like a full breakfast. And then 7 you'd start work. You'd punch in. And you could punch out for a half hour at 12, either at 12 or 12:30, first or second lunch shift, and you could punch out for a half hour at 5 or 5:30 for dinner shift. And we were done work when the sun went down. So it was like 7 in the morning till like 9:30 at night sometimes. And it was just, you were just on your feet all day. Like I learned about like having a good hat to keep the sun off your head. Um, Having good shoes was super important. And about every type of like ointment and cream you could possibly have for like heat rash and burns and stuff like that. But it was
How old
intense.
were you?
16.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
intense for a first job.
But
And I don't think of gas stations as like how big was this place and how many people came through there?
so it is the last gas station between Sault Ste. Marie and the next city um, on the Great Lakes, on Wawa. Basically, it's the last stop for gas. There's a big sign now. Like when it's closed in the winter, so it's only open seasonally. When it's closed in the winter, like there's a sign outside of Sault Ste. Marie, like no gas for 311 kilometers, right?
Okay.
Um, so it was big for that, and it's right beside one of our national parks where there's a lot of camping. So they had like a grocery store. They had like the Canadian Carver, which was all different carvings and artwork and stuff like that, local indigenous pieces and stuff like that. And then the um, Agua Center. Can't remember exactly. Agua Indian Crafts, it was called. Um, and then and that like there they sold the moccasins, and we had the gas station, and just a lot of people like going fishing, a lot of people going like for camping trips, stuff like that. They'd all stop in, and it was busy. It was crazy. It was like
How many of you were there?
there was most seasons. So I worked there for 3 years. Um, Most seasons it would start with a crew of 8, and by the end it was usually like there's four, four, and 2 in my 3 years. So, and we would never rehire. And the boss is always like, fewer, better. That's what he'd always say. And people would either quit or get fired, just because it was like insane.
Did he? I hope he paid you well enough so that when those people dropped off, it.
Oh no.
So you were accustomed to abuse at a young
Yeah.
age.
Yeah. It was the only thing that I can say that like paid well about it would be that you were there for so long, and you would sleep for like a day when you got home, and um, it just made it really easy to save. And we were doing things. So this is another thing for a gas station. It sounds super bizarre, but like they would pull up, we'd fill up their cars, and they had like these buckets of soap and these squeegees, and like you would clean the windshield, clean the mirrors, clean the headlights and taillights because they're covered in bugs,
Sure.
just because of where you are. But you'd get tips. You'd get like a person like fill up, and they'd be like, "Yeah, here, like have this," and I'd make like in a week like between $70 and $100 in tips just as a gas station attendant, right?
Yeah.
So this let me like
And
my
tipping culture isn't big in Canada.
no, no. This is the only place. Like I said, completely unique. I could probably just talk about this for our entire time. So I'm gonna try to wrap it up. But it was. I need you to know it was insane. Okay.
Yeah.
This guy. One time someone didn't pay at the pumps. Right.
Yeah.
He jumped into his truck. And he had a freezer full of rifles. He was like, he wasn't military, but he always wanted to be military.
Right.
And he chased down these guys, held them at gunpoint to get them out of their car. This is his story, but like I believe it, and tied them to a telephone pole and called the cops and waited for the cops to get there. And it was like $20, $20 in gas, but it was just the
That
principle.
guy is insane.
Yeah. Well, he had motion sensors all around outside the bunk, so that one, the guys couldn't go into the girls' bunk and vice versa, and two, so you couldn't get like off the property and no one could come onto the property, right? And if one of these sensors went off, he had night vision goggles, and he would go out and like look for the intruder.
You worked for a psychopath.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating.
But yeah, that was my first job. It was very intense, but it was very much like it ended up being like, especially after the first year when I was one of the four that stayed. So like 50% of the people stayed, and then I said it was coming back next year, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like there was no managerial position or anything like that, but it was just like, okay, like Brandon's in charge when Jerry's not here, right? Um, and it was unofficial, but it was just like I was always accustomed to that. People would listen to me. I could like organize people to like get together, and it was it was something very much that we were living through that, but and working very hard. And then Jerry, I'd just be like, listen, we're done. It's 9:30. Um, we're all exhausted. Can you just like, if you hear the alarm, we'll be back by 10:30. We're gonna go down to the beach. Okay, so we're not in our bunks, but we'll be back by 10:30. Once you hear that, if you hear anything after that, no one should be out that late. But it was stuff like that where it's like, if no one asked, right, you just went to your bunk. It's like, well, get ready to work tomorrow. Um, or just like advocating for the people that you're working with, like trying to build a team, trying to do something, have some type of fun, um, while you're there for 7 days.
You worked for like a paramilitary dictator
Yeah,
who saw like his little gas station as this like tiny kingdom.
and that's the thing though. It was completely unique.
Yeah.
Like I think he sold it for millions, and it wasn't
Wow.
like you wouldn't sell that to anyone else. Like it's still like an attraction
Huh.
here. Yeah,
Wow. Uh, Going back in the conversation a little bit,
yeah,
you mentioned you talked about hockey as well, which I know hockey is like a core part of the Canadian identity. And your like Tim Hortons mug there made an appearance. That's another part of the Canadian identity.
yep,
Uh, I guess two questions on that. I'll ask them both, and we can decide how you want to answer them. One, sort of like how did that sort of same question that I asked around video games, like how did that shape your character? Number two, sort of the difference. You said you did a couple of seasons in Double A, which of course would be very different, higher pressure than the sort of house leagues. Um, did you enjoy that? Was that better? Was it worse? Was it like how? Uh, so those are the two questions. How did they shape
yeah.
you, and then kind of the difference between those two?
I mean, like the big thing shaping was just having a routine and a regimen, and then really learning about uh, sportsmanship. Sportsmanship. I don't know. Uh, Being a part of a team, right? Like that camaraderie that you end up getting, and I think House League was really good for that because it changed every year, and it was usually like the same kind of people. Or it was the same like pool of people, right? And we just get
Mm-hmm.
drafted as we got older and stuff like that. So I'd play with the same people like maybe 4 years in a row, and then like one or two of the same people, right? And but the teams are mostly shifts, so you mostly knew everyone. But then every year you kind of had to like group together. Okay, this is my team now. Like I really enjoyed playing with Clint the last 4 years, but like now I'm against him. Um, that was really big, and my dad was really big on making sure that it's like, well, you signed up, you're going to do this, you're going to see it through, right, every year. And I love playing hockey, but there was times when it's just like I don't want to wake up at uh, for a 6 a.m. practice on a Wednesday, right? So you drive into town, you practice from 6 until 7, you drive back to Gooley, shower, and you're at school at 8:05, right? And it's just like everyone else is just like, oh man, just woke up, stuff like that. And I'm like, I've already lived a day. I feel like, no, I gotta do this. But it was always, my dad was always really big on like, uh, you signed up, you're gonna do it, and that really helped like for like commitment and like see through itness. What's the word? Perseverance, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it was great. I think that was more casual. I think um, I realized that I didn't have the fundamental passion to play hockey at a higher level through the double A stuff. It was a ton of fun. I was in the best shape of my life by far, um, and I mean I was young too. Like that helped, but even then, like it was really intense. but you had to, even at that level, you had to like eat, sleep, breathe hockey. Like that was it. It was like you couldn't, you know, there wasn't really time to. You play 2 games a week with 3 practices, so that's at least 5 nights of the week when you can't, like you couldn't do anything social, you couldn't be with your friends or anything like that. And it was right in like grade like 10 and 11, so it was right at that like social part of high school. And it was hard for me because I was still in Gooley, so like if I wanted to do anything, I either had to stay over or my parents had to like drive me in and out because I wasn't old enough to have a car yet. And yeah, it was very all consuming, I would
Yeah.
say. But it was a ton of fun. It's still something I look back on. Like I appreciate it, but it was almost like just like it was what I did. Like I don't really think about it as like something that was an opportunity. Like I assume it's one of those things where like until you get to know people, you assume that their backstory is probably pretty similar to yours. I just assume everyone played hockey, and it's like in the Sioux, that's a pretty safe assumption. But like everywhere else, it's not.
As a dumb American who knows almost nothing about sports in general and even less about hockey, which has less to do with being an American, like the sports part, but the hockey part, like there's, uh, explain the significance of fighting and the role of fighting in hockey. Like that's something that blows my mind. Like I've never quite gotten to like you don't see like in soccer,
Okay.
right? Like
Yeah.
like I played soccer growing up, right? And like yeah, people could get heated, it could get like whatever, but there was never like, two guys just ignored the ball and started wailing on each other. Like that's
Yeah.
not a thing that happens in other sports. Why does it happen in hockey? Why is that part of the game?
So I'm not a hockey historian, but the way that I've always looked at it is that ice rinks are too cold for cheerleaders, and that so you pump up, like honestly the you it's to pump up the team. So my brother-in-law actually. So no,
You're
no,
gonna
okay,
have
here
to
I
explain that because
if I go out there, right, if you're an enforcer, right,
I'm gonna
and it's
inspire
like,
my teammates by
and you
beating the
go
shit
out
out
there
of the other guy.
and yeah, and you know you grab one of their players, like maybe one of their players is like, maybe they play dirty, right, they hack at you every time they go by, stuff like that, right,
Okay.
you grab them, and you have to win for it to work, but you grab them, there's like a surge of adrenaline. So I'd have to look at the stats, but like it always felt like when you were playing, and in the younger leagues, like there was very few fights compared to like the NHL. I do have an anecdote about the NHL though. But like you get in a fight, and then it always felt like that would turn the momentum. Hockey is it always feels like a very emotionally driven momentum game,
Huh.
right? Where you could you could be down 4-1, let's say, and you're going into the third. And I'd always do this. I'd be like, okay, so we need to score 3 goals. We have 20 minutes left. So if we go score a goal every 6 minutes, like we tie it up. Um, but and like the morale on the bench is down, like everything's down, and then either like the fight could solve this, or maybe you score like a really nice goal, like whatever it is, it just suddenly swings the momentum, and you end up swinging into like all of a sudden it is a tie game, right? Um, that's how it felt anyway, playing
Yeah.
it. And the reason that I really latch onto that is like it's too cold for cheerleaders. Like we don't have anyone to pump with the team or anything like that. You end up having your enforcers do that. Is my brother-in-law is friends with someone who
Wait, enforcers. So this is like a role on
yeah,
the team where you're like, oh yeah, that guy, he's an enforcer.
yeah,
His job is to get out on the ice, and
his
when we
job
need
his job is
momentum,
to protect your best players and mess up the other team's best players, or fight with their enforcer, like whatever it is. Like the enforcers should stop each other. They're kind of like the King's Guard of
wow,
of
I'm
hockey.
learning a
So
lot about hockey.
there's a guy. I don't know. I'm not going to name him, but he played in the NHL. He won a Stanley Cup, and he's good friends with my brother-in-law. So that was wild. He brought the cup to the Sioux, um, and I got to drink out of the cup at this bar where he had it there because he brought it. It was a ton of fun. But anyway, he was kind of he was like a third, fourth line. So he's like a mid-range player, like wasn't like a star or anything like that. And he ended up being in the role of enforcer, right? And his coach in the NHL just walked into him. He's like, I don't have anyone picked out. but you're getting in a fight tonight, and then just walked. That was all. That was all the instructions.
A bar fight.
No. You're getting in a fight like on the ice.
Oh, okay.
So this is like they're getting ready. They're going out to play.
Gotcha.
And they were playing against a team that they kind of had a rivalry with. Right. There's a lot of history there.
Yeah.
And then like the coach just walked up to him. He's lacing up his skates. He's like, "You're getting in a fight tonight." And he hadn't picked out anyone, but that was the story. And then he went out and got in a fight. He's like, "Good job." I don't fully get it. Like, there's people who just love the hockey fights and stuff like that. I can see how they're entertaining, but like I liked playing. I liked how well the game could flow from a very technical perspective. I loved like the passing, getting the puck out of the corner, making the plays.
Not to like dwell on the fighting thing, but like just one more question and then I'll drop it. But like, is there an etiquette to the fighting? Because these are dudes that are wearing knives on their feet and carrying staves, and when they get into a fight, they drop the staves and go and like generally like they're taking like there seems to be rules to it.
It's like gentleman's agreement, I guess. But yeah, like you don't hit with your stick. You don't stab with you're trying to fight the person. You're not trying to
kill them. Yeah.
Right. And it's like it's like in the same way. I don't know if it's a Canadian thing, if it's a small town thing, but I'm just kind of used to it. And it's always like once a person's down, like the fight's done.
Yeah.
Like you don't you take off your gloves and your helmet because you both don't want to hurt your hands punching a helmet. And you don't want to hit someone with like your big gloves on or anything like that. And yeah, like you don't like it's super dirty to hit with a stick or anything like that.
Right.
Like slashing, cross-checking, stuff like that's really frowned upon. Or like at least that was always the impression I got. And it was almost like there's a lot of machoism in it. I think like no, we're just gonna line up, bare knuckle box on our knife shoes. And
that's great.
Yeah.
It seems oddly like you think of.
Well, it's like the only sport I think where there's just like that isn't a combat sport. There's just like they fight.
Yeah.
And not only that, but like they fight and then like they just go like they get a 5-minute penalty. Sometimes they get ejected from the game. I think my favorite thing was there was an old video game called Blades of Steel.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever played it, but it was a hockey game.
Okay.
Right? Developed by Konami. And it was like some people's like first introduction to like hockey games. Like they became huge. But in that you could get in fights. Okay? So if you hit it against someone 3 times in a row, they would like hold each other. And if you both tapped A, they'd punch. And then it would go to a completely different like Mortal Kombat style, like side-by-side fighting screen. And what I always remember from that is whoever lost the fight got the penalty. They had to go to the penalty box. And the team that won the fight was on the power play for 2 minutes.
And like everybody ignores the puck too, right? Like there's this other gentleman like the fight starts and everybody like stops, right? Like nobody goes like, "Oh, I'm going to take this and score while the fight is happening."
You got to watch the fight.
Yeah.
And like in the NHL, like a lot of them, once the fight starts, the ref will blow the whistle and then plays dead anyway.
Okay. All right. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, normally you think of fighting as this very like, I'm fighting because I'm mad. There's passion involved, right? And normally if somebody is fighting and has access to weapons, like they're going to get used. So it's this, it does seem like it's a more tactical, like the whole, you're going to get in a fight tonight. It's like, oh, okay. This is like a boxer, right? Like I'm going to use my skills. This is what I'm here for. There's no like necessarily passion or emotions involved. Although interestingly, that's the emotional impact of it. Swinging the momentum is the desired result of it.
Yeah. At least that's how I've always seen it. Like I said, I'm not a hockey historian. That's kind of like my experience, what I saw, and you could feel the emotional swing on a bench or something like that. It terrible to lose a fight though. I've been in 2 hockey fights. I won one and I lost one, and the one that I lost pretty bad. So.
Oof.
Yeah, I had to go to school the next day. I went to school with the guy I got in a fight with, and I had like a black eye and a big swole cut right there. But
I can't imagine you go to school and you're just like, "Hey, buddy," and you're like, "There's got to be some resentment after that."
No. No.
You're just like, good game, buddy. Like,
Yeah, it was leave it on the ice.
that's awesome. I love that. So, all right. So then, zooming out a little bit,
Yeah.
your background, your superhero origin story, some of what explains. To me, this is interesting because it informs. I can understand now why leadership and tech leadership, sort of how that picture comes together. If sort of some of the two main pillars here are Starcraft or
Yeah.
games, right? But specifically Starcraft, which is a strategy, a real time strategy game, and I've seen stories pop up in my news feed. I think I've read one or two like studies, but that have shown that people that specifically spend time with strategy games are better at making decisions, or rather, it's easier for them to make decisions. Like the apparatus around decision making, weighing pros and cons, things like that, gets exercised through that medium. And then hockey being sort of this like team sport, collaborative, competitive space. So the intersection of those two things to me, like, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
And they're both competitive, right? So you get an advantage or a disadvantage based on the decisions that you make. And I think what's really beneficial about them is they're both real time, right? They're so fast paced that you have to make a decision. You can't have analysis paralysis around it. You have to make a decision, and maybe you learn from it afterwards. Like maybe you go back and you look at the game, and you're like, oh, like I should have done this, and that might inform the next decision you make. In the same way with StarCraft, you know what I mean? You might look back like, oh, I decided to do this, I lost. You can look at the replay and be like, oh, well, next time when I'm in this scenario, I'll make a different decision. You know what I mean? But you don't have time to sit there and like wait for that specific scenario because you got whether it's hockey or StarCraft, there's so many moving pieces that no one's mastered having all of them, right? Everyone just prioritizes different parts of uh, the decision making. They prioritize different aspects of whatever you need to do, and you just get really comfortable with understanding one that you can make a decision. You kind of have to go with your first instinct for a lot of it, and that first instinct isn't just it's a gut feeling, right? It's informed from all of the decisions you've made in the past. And two, what's the worst that can happen, right? Like, yeah, it doesn't go well, maybe you lose, maybe something like that, but it's not life or death,
Yeah.
like for a lot of it. And I think like in our field, you know what I mean, there's definitely fields where it is life or death, and I don't envy those people.
Yeah.
But you learn a lot, like how much you just agonize, or I've seen people agonize over decisions that really, one way or the other, right, it's probably going, the long term effect is it's going to improve, because either it's going to go really well, oh my gosh, that was fantastic, or it's going to be like, oh no, this was not the right decision, let's take a step back, and maybe you end up with outside help, maybe you end up like with a completely different perspective, and then you finally make the right decision. It just, yeah, it forces you to make decisions, and once you've made enough of them, it's a habit, it's not something that you agonize over.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I guess before we move into tech leadership and off of sort of your background, are there any other
Yeah,
like
so
pivotal, like this is a thing that happened in your life that was like an event that maybe solidified some values or some like something for you?
I will. So I took you through like the deep backstory. I'm gonna go through the like what led me to Workiva kind of
Sure.
real quick. But
Yeah.
I went to university, and in my second, in between my second and third year, I got an internship at a government facility here that did not pay very well. But it was like, this is the only place you could work in tech, kind of in the Sioux, was kind of like the thought at that time. And I went in, I was the only programmer, right? They had like an IT division, but they like mostly built like websites and or like they just like distributed hardware and stuff like that. And I was in a cubicle, and at 10:15, you heard every screen turn off, pencil drop, whatever it was, and we lined up at Tim Hortons and we all got our coffee and our coffee break. Like it was like the most corporate of corporate cultures, right? And it was just like no one was there after 4:30. It was just, and I hated it. I hated it so much. And I thought like, why am I getting a degree in this field if this is what it's going to be like? Like I was buying lottery tickets on my lunch hour, being like, I need like some out. And like of all the crazy stuff I told you about my first job, like at least the time went by when I was there.
Yeah.
Like it was like so. From that, I actually decided when I went back into third year, I'm like, nope, I'm dropping out. And my parents took this really hard. Um, and I'm gonna work in kitchens right now. I'm gonna figure it out. But like I felt like super useful. And I did that. I worked from takeout basically with like no formal training. Then I was the pizza cook, and then eventually became the line cook. Then eventually I was calling the board, assistant manager, closing 5 nights a week, doing specials, everything like that. And it was just like this slow progression. But
At what kind of restaurant?
it was like an Italian pub grub place, I'd say.
Yeah.
So I did that for 5 years, and after that 5 years, it was just the bringing point. I was sitting there, and this is when we forced our minimum wage up to 10.25 an hour from 7.75 an hour over 3 years. The government did it. So these people that were coming in, they're just like, well, we can only move you to the same minimum wage because it's still a raise for you, but you're hiring like dishwashers that have like no experience. And I asked for 50 cents an hour. I worked 80 hours a pay, would have been like $40.
Yeah.
And they said they couldn't afford it. And 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 I never I
Our
had Tuesday
margins
when
are that
yeah,
thin.
I had Tuesday, Wednesday off, right?
Yeah.
So I was never off on the weekend. I worked every holiday because there were busy days for the restaurant. I had to schedule months in advance unpaid time off. We didn't get paid time off,
Holy shit.
but I had to schedule months in advance because like my parents were like, yeah, we're gonna go to Cuba. You know, we want to take our kids. We're gonna go on our first family trip or whatever. And it was like a big ordeal to schedule that. Like, well, what are we gonna do? You know what I mean? And then they couldn't afford. Right. So I was like, I love cooking. I love this environment, but like I've worked now. I've been paying rent doing this. I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna finish my degree. And like when I went the first time, one, I was going there, but I was also going for like the university experience. Like I hung out in the lounge. I made all the friends and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I worked and I had to complete my third year and my fourth year to get my degree, and I was still working 40 hours a week because I was out on my own. I had rent to pay and everything like that. Um, so I went to a bar, pub grub place, and applied to work in the kitchen because I could go to school and then I could work from 6 to 2, and I could still get my 8 hours in. And Joey's, like the place that I worked before, the Italian place, who was in the mall, it was only open till 10. I never would have got full hours. I wouldn't have been able to afford rent. So anyway, I told them, I'm like, I'm gone. And they're like, well, like, what about like the etiquette and everything? Like, what about your 2 weeks notice? I'm like, you just said you can't afford $40. Like, you'll be fine. Um,
Yeah.
I ended up staying for like a week and a half until they they kind of sorted some stuff out, and they gave the two people that I had been training. They were like my like go-to people that I relied on. They gave them both $1 an hour raise, so they could afford it.
The through line for your early professional experiences seems to be hard work, discipline, and getting exploited.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I talk to them now and stuff like that, but it was like very exploitive. So yeah, then I went back. I worked in the bar place, and then I worked at like a higher end place for about 6 months, right near the end, because it was right under my apartment. I had moved or whatever, and that place was they paid better, and but it was just a different style of work. Like I wasn't making 400 chicken fingers a night. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was going in between classes, and I would like hand press like lobster raviolis, right? And we'd sell 5 lobster raviolis for like 30 bucks a plate. You know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
like the first higher end. So that was a lot of fun. Um, and then I was so happy. I was finally done with kitchens, and I went to Syntec Media. And the main thing I did there was I did regex. basically,
I
because
saw,
all
yeah. I saw the description on your LinkedIn. Like
it
you
was
just said
well.
regex and sequel.
So what they had is like this was at our health unit, right? So like the government health unit, and
Yeah.
they just had four different styles of flat file databases from like they were just historical. Like that's just where we keep it. So we wrote regex that would go and scrape that overnight and then get the pertinent fields, put them
Oh,
into a SQL table
overnight it took like the
overnight.
entire.
Yeah. So we were always 24 hours behind, right? And then we just pivot the tables and we generate reports. And then they always had reports about like what was going on, the users for funding, everything like that. And then I got hired to finish the scraper, which I did, and then we implemented a new system that was going to be like a new actual database system and everything like that. We hired two other people, and when we were done that, um, they cut the contract because they're just like, well, we have the new system now. We don't need IT department. So they kept like the one head guy, and three of us got laid off. And then um, I was sitting there, ended up back in kitchens.
So I
Although,
expect this from American companies, like that sort of like ruthless. Thanks for automating yourself out, and now we're gonna just let you go. I guess maybe I've just had this rosy picture, mental
yeah,
model of capitalism in Canada that it's somehow more.
we we're like your little brother. We follow suit. Um, but yeah, so that happened, and then I was working kind of when I could, just because I couldn't sit around the house because I was on employment insurance for 3 months, and I was back in kitchens on 2 days, and then because of the way EI worked, if I worked more than that, I would end up like losing money because they were already taking like half, right,
Yeah.
for like whatever I worked, and I was just kind of sorry. I go back. The second time I went back, right, I wasn't in for the university experience. Like I kept my hoodie on, I went to the front of class, I took my class, I left the school, right? I was there to get a job done,
Yeah.
and that was it. Um, and the only time that I wavered in that was in a class called programming languages, in which we looked at functional programming, so Prolog and Lisp, and we compared it to like conventional programming. And in that class was one McLeod Broad, who you may or may not know, and We argued so much in that class. It's
that
the
was
only place I was engaged.
that was where you met Mac.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we would argue in there, and then we ended up like just like frenemies almost because like he had been working in the industry. I had this idealistic view of like how it would go, and like we'd go back and forth, and then like we'd meet up like right before exams or something like that, and we just like shoot the shit outside. um but that's where I met him. And anyway, the reason that's important is that after this, like Syntac, I didn't want to work at the government place that was here because I'd been there before, and I had looked around. I wasn't really finding a job. My wife has her mother lives in Edmonton, so out west, way bigger city, way more tech jobs. And I just posted on Facebook. I'm like, well, I'm gonna head out west and see what that has for me. And Mac of all people is just like, you should probably go talk to my boss before you leave town. So I did. I sent worked on my resume with Mac, ended up sending it over, and I talked to Andy,
Yeah.
right? And I just went for lunch with him, and I went and we sat down, and he's like, "Well, you don't have a lot of programming experience." I'm like, "No, I don't, but like I really like solving problems. Like I think I can do this. I just need the opportunity." And he's like, "Well, like what are some of the like what would you do if you could just build anything?" I said, "Well, I come from the restaurant industry, and like I really wish that we had better software for that." And he's like, "Well, like what's wrong?" I'm like, "Well, if you get slammed, you have a waitress, right? All of a sudden, five tables walk in, right? She goes and she takes the order on pen and paper, and she's not going to run to the computer and punch that in because those people see her and are waiting. So she's going to do all five tables. So now you've added 20 minutes of wait time to that first table that took your order. Whereas if we had something where they could put it in, send it wirelessly, like you need to batch these, you need to queue them and stuff like that." And he actually came. He's like the way that you thought about that problem, like it's very much like how we would deal with like tasks and everything that we were doing at the time in GAE. He's just like, you see the problems how we want, and he's just like, yeah. He's like, we're gonna give you a chance. And yeah, So he called, and like you said, exploitative in what I was doing before. He's like, "Well, what were you making at your previous job?" And I told him, and he laughed. He's like, "Okay, we'll do a bit better," and
Uh-huh.
they did.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so it was, and I got there, and I'm like, Mac, like, what are you doing? Like, me and you, like, all we did was argue. He's like, yeah, I don't want people who are going to agree with me here. I'm just gonna. So me and Mag like became like really good friends when I was first starting, and then I was working through, and I was relying on him and other people that were like just working. I was blown away by how smart everyone was. It was like very uh, eye-opening for me. I was so used to being like this big fish in like a little pond kind of, and all of a sudden like there's all these people, and I try to explain this like to people that I see now that like I maybe ran into before, and they're
Mm.
still like living kind of the same life like here. They haven't really moved out of the city that much and stuff. And they're like, "Oh man, like, do you remember?" I'm like, yeah, a little bit, but no, I don't remember your brother. Like, "Oh man, that's nice." I'm like, "Yeah, but I've met like 400 new people, like, and I just like flew to like Iowa and like met all these people in like this giant building. It's like I have. It feels like a completely different life." Um,
It's crazy that you say that because so I'll I'll give some
yeah, no,
background
go ahead. Yeah,
myself here, which is that I also worked in the restaurant industry for many years, uh, mostly on the front end of the house, front side of the house, but waiter, head waiter, that kind of a thing. Did spend some time in back of house too. Not much, but enough to sort of like get the lay of the land there and understand what's going on. And I've worked in lots of other industries outside of tech too. Coming to tech, whole different ball game. Like it's and people outside of it don't understand. It's like unless you're doing something else that's like very white collar, like you're a lawyer or a doctor or something like that, right? Like working with this many smart people in an environment where like there's very little policing or like micromanagement, or it's just like you're a professional, we expect you to act like a professional. uh, it's like for people who have not experienced that, maybe they've experienced something similar where you grow up in a very small town and you are like the smart person, and then you go to college in some big town and it's like, oh shit, there's a bunch of smart people here, right? That's if there's sort of an analog, it's maybe that, because I remember
yep,
same thing coming to tech and just being like, okay, yep, totally new ball game.
yeah, and it was like I can't even. It's hard to even explain uh, to someone like my old friends and stuff like that. It's just like, and I don't want to get into it, and it almost feels like bragging, and I don't like to be that person.
Yes.
So it's just like everything changed, and like what you said about like not a lot of policing and stuff like that. Like it was 100%, but like I just wanted to do well, so I was pairing a lot with other people and stuff like that. And I remember I got one of my first like projects, right, that ended up taking me like a month, and I was really proud of it. Um, but I was sitting there and I was just like, I was like, well, like I'm stuck here and I don't understand this. And I was talking to Mac, and Mac was working on something else at the time. And this always stuck with me for some reason. He's like, we're paying you money to figure it out. Figure it out. And he took his laptop and he went to his office. And it was like the first time where it was just like, no, like you can kind of like you can do this. Like just, you know, but like I can't hold your hand anymore. It was like 3 or 4 month mark. And
Yeah.
it was the first one that I ended up yeah, working through and like getting in. It touched a whole bunch of. It touched everything, um, but it was very much like, oh, like I can figure this out, and it was still like I still wasn't the best programmer, but it was very much like at that point in my life too, I could spend the time, and it was like just working through it. I did a lot of like test driven design, I would say. I wrote the tests, and I actually followed that because I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to write. I knew what I wanted to happen, but I was never someone who could like just sit down. I wasn't someone who programmed like apps in their spare time. Not very creative about like how do I get started. I loved working to fix things in a larger system, right? Because it's like, well, these are the parameters, and out of this part, it's supposed to, you know, input A turns into output C,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I just knew that I had to get there. So then I could just iterate, kind of test through. And I learned a ton that way. I learned a ton about like even more about logic, about like programming languages, about GAE of all the things. But like, um, as I say, now I have a ton of programming experience in ActionScript for Flash and Python 2.7, which are both completely dead technologies.
Dude, yeah, my programming is also way outdated. Um, I, I'll share a sort of an interesting story with you, just like to go back a moment on the whole like this is software is a different world. I actually very recently had someone reach out to me who wanted to get into the industry, and of course I work now in the gaming space, online
Mhm.
gaming space. So I work for Fanatics Betting and Gaming, and I was talking to somebody who was like had worked for decades in physical casinos, right? Like physical, I mean like actual brick and mortar casinos. So and this person was like applying for a role, reached out, just wanted to talk for a little while, and I was like, sure, I'll talk. And it just blew my mind. Like it took me back to that world for a moment, like the pre-software world, because the questions she asked were things like, "Do you guys get paid on time?" And I laughed. I laughed then. I can't help but laugh now because like in software, the whole notion of like, oh yeah, the company like missed your paycheck is like, that's table stakes. The whole company quits, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the idea that like the workers could even like we the workers would be exploited or treated in that way by the companies that we work for now is just completely otherworldly. And yet, this is the world that so many people, the majority of people, I would say, like, they work in these kinds of environments, exploitative. The company does as little as possible to reward your effort, gives you very little autonomy, monitors your every move. Like that's the norm, and it just like that reminder was very visceral to me of like, oh yeah, I'm very privileged.
Yeah. And it's I don't know what the benefit. That's kind of like that mindset we talked about earlier, wanting to help people, um even if a small percentage take advantage of you. Because I see that one, this sounds silly, but like all of the stability with tech was very beneficial. 100%. It was great to know that I was going to get paid, and I was getting paid, a living wage for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
But it was just like I showed up, let's say, consistently at 8:47 in the morning. That's just how my routine went out. If I was told by the company, no, 8:30 is the start time, and if you're not here, you'll get written up. Like you're late, you won't get paid. Whatever it is, like a lot of other businesses are. Um, I would have been stressed every morning. I might have made it, but it would have like it, and it didn't. In the end, right? It didn't matter because like people showed up at like some people showed up at like 9:30, and they would leave later than I would. But it was kind of like they trusted they almost trusted me to like do the right thing to a certain extent. And I still think about it. Like I watch my wife still works at a bank, and like it is like hardcore. Like you got to be there on time, and I see how much stress that puts on her. And it's just like what why like what is the benefit of that?
Yeah.
And um if people are routinely taking advantage of it, or people are like abusing the system because you give them some leeway, then those people need to learn to like be better. Like you don't need to put up with it. You don't just need to let someone do that to you. But you shouldn't punish every employee now and in the future because you had a bad experience with like one person or one subset of people or some percentage of people. And this really stood out to me when I first started going to the gym like regularly. We had a gym, it was open 24 hours, and you had a scan card. That was your membership. And I had forgotten my shoes in my car, but I had already scanned in. And my card would not scan for another 45 minutes because they didn't want me going there and then scanning to let my buddy in, right?
Yep.
But it was punitive to everyone who just followed the rules because someone might abuse it. And it's just like I don't know why it stuck out so much to me, but it's just like why are we inconveniencing everyone when it's unmanned gym 20 hour, it's $4.99 a month or something like that. Like it was a very like discount gym. It's like,
Yeah.
and I thought like so much of like a lot of like what we do is that like when I don't know, wins, or like when things are going normal, right? That's your status quo. So you don't really get any emotional spike or lowering through that. But we're almost vindictive if we get ripped off, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like it feels way worse to get ripped off than it feels good to have a good day.
Yeah.
And I think we plan for that. We almost like we don't want that to happen, and I get it, but like I still think most people mean well. I think that they and that goes for like every industry I've worked in.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was people that took advantage at restaurants. There's people that took advantage at gas stations. There's people that took advantage at Syntec, right? But for the majority of either the time or the people, right? They were doing their job, and they were like, and they're all just people, right? They're not perfect automata that perform this job from 8 to 5. Like, oh, I wish we could get rid of bathroom breaks, and then I think of Amazon and stuff like that. But anyway, that's
Well, and there's a certain amount of that that is like retribution. Like there's a certain amount of employees taking advantage of the system that is in retribution for the system being needlessly cruel.
yeah,
And so the tighter you lock down the system and make people feel like they're living in or working in sort of a quasi prison system, the more people try to break out and find avenues for freedom, right? Like, when your work says like, you must arrive, for example, and be on the clock at exactly this time every day. That's a restriction that people like. Obviously, there's like to have an understanding and a rule is fine, but to have like punitive measures in place
yeah,
takes it to a whole other level that then again, like you said, adds that stress, adds right, and it's on pain of like, yeah, you're gonna lose your job eventually. Like there's and then people find ways to like, okay, how do I get back, right? Like how do I
yeah,
win back some control over myself and my life? And some of that's like, I stole the toilet paper, right?
yeah.
you know, so like it's, and I know that you can't just like, I want to believe that there is that we could, but maybe here's my question to you is like, how could we get to a point where like, you know, the banks and the Wendy's drive-through, the Tim Hortons, the like where everybody is getting that level of trust from their employer, as we enjoy in our profession.
Um, I think it's interesting. You need to. I think it's hard for less involved jobs, but it comes down to it still comes down to like hiring and firing. And I think a lot of people, even in that world where they're willing to be punitive, owners, managers, let's say at like restaurants, as an example, still don't like firing people. It doesn't feel good. Like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But that's how you get there. And that's something that I always believed in. Even when I was spent a lot of time at the restaurant. This is fresh because I just ran into someone who's still working in restaurants, and they saw me and they're like, "Oh my god, like you were the best line cook. Like I loved working with you. You know, you were the best lead. It was great. You know, it was way better and way worse after you left." I was like, and I think back to it, and it's kind of like what I've still applied to my teams today. It was like, listen, like we need to accomplish X, Y, Z today. Like the food needs to go out, the dishes need to be done, the place needs to be clean before we leave, and we all can't just stay here if there's not enough work to do. So some people are gonna have to leave early, whatever that is. And there was always volunteers to do that. When I said like, as long as we're doing all that, like I don't care if the radio's on, I don't care if we're joking, I don't, just get it done. I don't care if you take a smoke break every hour. You still have to get your job done. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't punitive, and that only worked. Like I always had to be letting people go, because in that you had so many people coming through. But when you found people that it only works if you can trust the whole group,
Yeah.
right? And I had to let a lot of people go or say they weren't working out, because either they would take advantage of it, or they would be like the opposite of that. They would like take it and they go to the owner and they'd be like, I don't smoke, why does he get to go out like every hour for a smoke, like about another guy, right? And it's just like, They're like, it's not fair. I'm like, well, is it not fair? What do you want to do? Like, it might, on the surface, I understand it's not fair, but what is he getting out of that, right? You're done your job earlier. You want to go home at 10 because you have a WoW raid. You know what I mean? Like, that's fine because you're done everything. If you'd taken 5 more breaks, you wouldn't have been done at 10.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, so I always try to build like that trust with the people that I have, and I think it has to do with like um, getting people who want to do that job, complete those tasks, whatever that is. And there's going to be people like I don't like the idea of like there being like types of jobs that are unsavory or that well, if we paid everyone the same, no one would do this, right? Um, if if you paid me the exact same salary, right, I'd probably cook, or I could be convinced to cook. You know what I mean? It's hard. It's hard on your body. It's very hot. It's a much physically more demanding job than I do now. But there's a lot less mental stress on it, and you never take it home, right?
Yeah.
When the rush is over, the restaurant's closed, right?
Yeah.
I'm not background processing like, oh, how could I have made that veal parm better? Like it was just
Yeah.
like you know what I mean? Like it's just like there's trade-offs, and it's just I think that we've gotten too far into like looking down on what some of the work is
Mm-hmm.
to be like, um, I don't want to get into like politically charged territory here or anything like that, but it's like I really believe that if someone is working 40 hours a week, no matter what work they're doing, they shouldn't ever have to choose between housing and food,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that should be the bar. And
Yeah, no, and
I
I totally agree with you. There's like, if somebody is working and productive, like, there's no reason why they shouldn't have basic needs met.
yeah, and it's just um, I don't think that there's a lack of money. I don't think we want for anything,
Yeah.
right? I think that we could get there, and it's just and almost everything like needs to it almost needs to be like um, a domino effect because you get a lot of like, well, I only make I only made $17 an hour working for Syntech and I had a degree, and now you want to pay your restaurant workers $15 an hour. It's like, okay, I get that, but I probably should have been making like $23, $24 an hour for the Syntech job. Like it needs to go all the way up
Yeah.
to a certain extent, and there's some businesses that aren't viable in that model, um, or not as profitable, I should
Mm-hmm.
say. Um, and I think about it a lot because my a good friend of mine here owns a clothing store, and he's feeling the squeeze from like the WalMarts that come in, the kind of the big box stores, and it really hearing him talk about it, right, and talk about the history of it from when he's fourth generation now. They've been open for 108 years, and like when their competition, they were in the West End. When their competition was another clothing store in the East End, it made a ton of sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? They could change their deals, what they were offering. Maybe they filled different niches, stuff like that. But they were both thriving, right? But now one of them's out of business and the other one's struggling because why would I ever buy pants here when I can get them for $5 cheaper from here, or I can get them for the same price and they get delivered to my door. Um, so I don't know. That's a huge tangent. I'm sorry.
Well, it actually, so it does sort of, no, you're fine. It actually does play into one of the questions that I wanted to ask you about tech leadership, which is it has to sort of the tie-in here is with the challenges that we face now, or the industry faces, challenges maybe that you're facing, and we don't have to get into like super specifics. Obviously,
Yeah.
you work currently for Workiva, and I'm not going to ask you to
Yeah.
get into things that you can't talk about. But it strikes me as, talking about the economics and the viability, one of the challenges that a lot of companies, particularly tech companies, are facing now post COVID, or post. I mean, I can't really say post COVID because like it's still a thing. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? But like
Yeah.
post transition to remote work for tech companies, there are certain companies, and I will say that Workiva is probably among them, but I wouldn't single them out here. There are tech companies who started outside of the coastal environments, right? Who set themselves up in like the Midwest or somewhere else where there's a cheaper cost of living, and they started their whole business model and pricing structure around a cost of goods sold that assumed being able to pay developers in local regional markets. And now that software development has become a remote first affair for many, many places, that assumption that was baked into pricing and cost of goods sold and the profitability of the company is blown out of the water. Does not work. And the cost of hiring software developers and engineers specifically, if I'm like kind of to break this down for people who may not be familiar with what I'm talking about there, hiring a developer, like local labor markets for software engineers basically don't exist anymore. Like if you're out looking for a job right now, you're getting paid basically Silicon Valley by like rates if you're a software developer, and that doesn't matter if you live in Silicon Valley or if you live in like where I live, rural Wisconsin, right?
Yeah. And I think that like it's volatile too, right? You definitely had at the first of this year, you had it was the best environment you could be in if you were looking for a job. It was absolutely nuts. And then the market's changed a little bit, like most recently, I'd say dealing with this and looking at hiring, where some places are still following that regional model, and they're laying off in the areas that cost the most, right? They're holding on to the remote talent that they have, and they're letting go of like the Silicon Valley people who. Um, so I don't know. It feels like it fluctuates quite a bit. I think that in particular, it's something that I've been um, very vocal about, especially after different states pass laws in which you need to like show the salary ranges, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of blew up the regional model to a certain amount, because if everyone in the same region was just talking to each other, they were all within the bands of that region, right?
Yeah.
But then you start to see the exact same job, right? The same job responsibilities of someone that you're working with probably day to day, but they're on a different team, and they're making 20-30% more than you, and that doesn't feel good. um, and it's something where i think I think there's going to be like a middle ground. That my hope is for a middle ground of like, one, you should play every advantage, but I don't think it's really fair to expect, well, I could get X. You should never threaten, right? I could get X if I went here. Um, that feels like a threat. Like if you want to go do that, like go do that. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Um, and it's also not fair to be like, well, for the companies to say something like, well, this other company's paying even less for that. Like, you know what I mean? It goes both ways. Like it's got to be within the confines of whatever company you are. I think the companies need to figure that out. And some of it isn't asking for like, hey, um, I need 300% more for this, right? But maybe it's like, maybe the region shouldn't be like double digit percentages apart, right? For the exact same job.
Yeah.
And it's not saying everyone needs to be paid the same everywhere else. The best way that I've heard it put, that I've repeated, is um, don't pay people what you can get away with paying them, pay them what they're worth. And that's going to change. Cost of living, obviously, like that changes a lot of things. I understand that. But it shouldn't be such a big discrepancy that like people want to drop a level in their job and move to a new place because they get paid more.
Yeah.
And a lot of people aren't going to do that. I understand that. It should feel equitable to a certain extent. It doesn't need to be completely equal across everything. But when if you're in one of these regions that is there's paid less overall, your superstar, right, can end up getting paid less than the least productive person on another team. Doesn't mean both those people aren't great, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't feel equitable to the person that's like killing it at the time.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Did that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, so effectively, like, listen, there are, for an established company that's not like a startup playing with, like, fuck you money, For an established company that has a pricing model and a business model, revenue streams, established revenue streams, and cost structures, to suddenly have the market rate for its labor go way up. This is a huge challenge because the way that I see the market right now, and having I've been at my current employer for almost 3 months, and my participation in that labor market, and trying to, and of course I'm hiring now too, or have been hiring. My team is full now, but I have been, as somebody who participated in this, I'll say it to shorthand it. Why would you not, if you were looking for a job, why would you not first go look at those places that are paying near top of market and that don't care where you live and aren't doing market-based pricing, location-based pricing, whatever, right? So clearly there's an advantage for companies who can afford it to grab the best talent and skim off the top there, right? That said, when I was looking for a job, I had 3 separate companies that I interviewed with, and there was a contraction during my interview period, and 3 separate companies. I got to the end of their interview process, and they all said to me, "We want to hire you. We want to make you an offer. We've been forced to freeze hiring." And so it's this really weird juxtaposition right now of some companies have had to contract, have had to freeze hiring, have had to lay people off. We've read about that, right? And then there are others that are just yep, we got all the money in the world. Send us your people.
Yep. And it's always going to be different. But I think that this is a topic that I've been on. There's other incentives, right? And you'll hear this from companies that are going to talk about whether it's perks, benefits, culture, people, whatever it is, and that's true. There's a holisticness to what you're looking for in a job. But I also talked to a lot of people that were looking for jobs, right? And this kind of led me to doing a lot of research into the 4-day work week, where because I heard anecdotally from people who reported to me, they're I would take a 20% pay cut if it was a 4-day work week, right? So money wasn't the big factor, right?
Yes.
They wanted to feel equitable, but they feel there's other things you can do that aren't outright cash flow, right? And I still argue for don't change the salary, don't do 40 hours. It's 32 hours a week. I was really swayed by reading about, of all places, a gaming studio, Blackbird Interactive. They were burnt out. They were coming up on crunch time. They didn't have their game. Kind of like a last-ditch effort, right? And the last place you'd think would move to less hours would be a game studio, famous for 80, 90-hour work weeks, stuff like that. But they went through the whole story, and it was about first it was about, we don't want to lose the 4-day work week, right?
Yeah.
But then afterwards, when you talk to people, they're just I actually recharge on the weekend. I have a day now that I plan to do errands. I have a day that I spend with my family, and I have a day to recharge myself, just relax. Various iterations of that. And what they ended up doing is during their workday, they're does the stand-up need to be 25 minutes? Can we get it done in 12? Whatever it is. You know what I mean? They worked out their own efficiencies to be able to make sure they're no, we need to get this done in there. And they were more engaged. They ended up meeting the project on time that they thought they were going to miss. And in the survey, they had way less burnout. And it's burnout isn't something that you get over when you take a week off. You know what I mean? It takes a long time for you to get there, and you probably don't realize the whole time that you're getting there. But having something where you can schedule, that you have that time protected, can help heal you through the process. So that's something where I think I'm hoping more companies move in that direction, because if I was looking for a new job, that would be one of my main criteria. That would be one of the first thing I looked for before I looked for money, because that's, I just think that our style of job, what we can do, and the research that I've done from people that have tried it, you get as much productivity, but you have healthier people, right? And
Yeah.
I was thinking about it, the loud part that you're not supposed to say out loud is that like everyone's checked out on Friday afternoon and everyone's completely groggy and
Yeah.
not there on Monday morning. You know what I mean? So let's just get rid of those as an example. No one wants to hear that because they're like, people are, they're at their job. They got to take it seriously. But it's just, that's what I've observed. And it's one of the things where when you talk about it, people are like, oh, well, especially like my parents and the boomer generation, stuff like that. They're like, well, you know, you work 5 days a week. Like, that's just how it is. I'm like, well, but the like labor unions got us the 5 day work week. Like, why don't we just like, if you're calling us lazy for wanting to go to 4 days instead of five, like, why don't we go to six? Like, why don't we work 6 days a week? Imagine how productive we'd be then. In fact, religious adherence is way down in my generation. Like, what are we doing
Uh-huh.
off on Sundays, right?
Yeah.
Why don't we just work 7 days a week? Like, well, no, it's like, well, you're just used to a 5 day work week. Like,
Right.
that doesn't mean like that's how it needs to be. And
There's an interesting component here. So I'm glad you brought in the generational perspective, because I see this as a continuation on a theme for our generation. When you compare our generation to the boomers
mhm,
specifically, but older generations, I'll generalize. There is a very prevalent uh, like line of thinking ingrained, which is like work hard, work really really hard when you're young, and then you'll be able to retire with money and do whatever you want, right? It's this whole like sacrifice now, reap the reward later. And I feel like our generation and younger are kind of going like, nah, I'm not good with that. I want to enjoy living life now too, right? I'm
yep,
not okay with just being like, yep, life sucks now and it's going to suck for another couple decades, and then when I turn 55, I can finally enjoy life. I think for a couple of reasons. One, we're not, the world is on fire.
yeah,
Like tomorrow is not guaranteed, right? Like
yep,
I think there is a real feeling in our generation of like, who knows, right? Putin could launch nukes tomorrow. We like there's tomorrow is not guaranteed. Like that's
yep,
just the best way to put it, right? And so, or at least the best way I've found to articulate the idea. And so, like, and it's not that we're all like, you have to strike a balance. You have to strike a balance between, yes, I'm making sure that I am like saving, and if I manage to get to 55, that sure I can retire and whatever. Although that is another thing that like for our generation, most people are just saying like we're not going to ever be able to retire. Uh, but there's a balance to strike between like not completely sacrificing today, still trying to be able to enjoy your life now while also making responsible decisions for the future. And it's a different balance point for our generation than previous generations have chosen.
yeah. And I think that like a lot of it, um, we don't realize how much things have changed, right? Even when you were sacrificing, like when my dad was sacrificing for that one, he took a job at a steel mill, which I don't think is anyone's dream when they're a kid. You know what I mean? But it paid well. It's super hard work, super dangerous. He said people die on shift with him. Like, it's just like it is not a fun place to be. Um, and even when he was sacrificing there, right? There was a transition in the 90s when my mom went back to school and she ended up getting her accounting degree and got a job. And it's right in that transition when it went from like you couldn't have a single income working 40 hours a week, pay for a house, provide for a family, right? All of a sudden, more people were becoming dual income. And now, for like our generation and the generation behind us, that's just expected. You're going to have your own career, you're going to do that.
Yes.
But especially when you reach like a certain age, and for me, it was really obvious when I had a family. And I'm not saying you need to have a family to like need the time or whatever, but there's no one who's just dedicated to like looking after your family, whether it's the father or the mother. You know what I mean? Now you're both working 40 hours a week, and you get 2 days on the weekend, and a lot of times like you're tired, or you know you celebrate Friday to a certain extent, and then one of your days is kind of like half there, half gone, and the other days for your family, and then that day is also spent like, oh well, we can't go too late, can't stay out anywhere, can't really go for like an overnight trip because we got to work the next day, and just contracts everything. And I think that, yeah, it's just we want to enjoy our life to a certain extent, and I think that there's a certain like understanding with automation, technology, how far we've come, right? That has enriched the people who develop that technology and those programs uh, to absurd levels of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's not necessary anymore. Like it was like for a certain amount of time, like it was necessary for your town, your village, whatever it was, to survive. You know what I mean? But now
Yeah.
the types of jobs that we have are a lot of them are in convenience or providing services, or like you're not the world's not going to fall apart um,
Yeah.
if the Wendy's girl doesn't go in on Friday. You know what I mean? And even like where I am, like my team might fall apart to a certain extent, but not if I'm gone for a day. You
Right.
know, a project that is going to take 3 quarters, you know, that's 9 months, isn't going to fall apart if someone takes a week off.
We've built a system that is very good at maximally extracting value from people while concentrating the results of that. And
Yeah,
it's
and I would argue that you're probably not getting the most value from people.
yeah.
I think that you could have better people, more engaged, and you know, it's something that I talk a lot about, and I hear again from I've talked to my parents a lot about this, and it's good because it's that generational view. But it's like, oh, that might work in tech, you know, but it's not going to work here. And I'm like, I don't understand. I think the same benefits still apply. I think that even in the steel mill, I think you'd be better off if you had days where people were more engaged and more well rested, right? Like how many
Oh,
accidents
yeah.
happen? How many accidents happen because it's your fifth 10-hour shift in a row
Yep.
or something like that, and you're tired, like you just haven't had the time to sleep and stuff like that. I think that's true in the restaurant, and I just think that you know it's hard to shift out of the mindset of it's the classic like trolley problem. I just saw this a ton with the student debt relief in your country, where it's like, well, would it really be unfair? Would it be fair to the people the trolley has already killed to divert the train now? Right? It's like other people have suffered. I get that. You know what I mean? But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean everyone needs to suffer in the same way. It's we can get better. And I think that's a really big I read about this. I'm no political expert or anything like that, but we've always wanted to make the world better for the generation that comes after us. That's really important to me with my daughter. And I don't think it's true anymore. And I see people who profit from the system to get where they are, because whether like you like it or not, you need to like work through the system
Mm-hmm.
to get, even if you're super successful, right?
Yeah.
And then looking at like policies or um, you know, workplace behaviors that pull the ladder up after them. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I really don't like. Like we should be expanding, you should expand the base that helped you get where you are so more people can get where you are.
So I think this is a really. I'm going to draw a parallel here that might take a moment to explain,
Okay.
but when we were talking about Starcraft earlier, so the thing that fascinates me about there's many things that fascinate me about Starcraft, but the competitive scene for Starcraft, the rule set doesn't change, right? Like the game is created. Yes, it goes through some tweaks. There are balance tweaks occasionally, but generally speaking, the rule set doesn't change in the over the long term. And what happens at the meta level as seasons and competitive cycles go through, you had your build order, right? You had your build order. You knew exactly what you're going to do. You're going to build hydralisks and go kill the enemy base. Well, this is a refinement process, an iterative exploration of the optimization of a rule set. Like in the aggregate. Like eventually what happens is after like if the rule set doesn't change, after 30 competitive seasons or whatever, somebody comes up with the strategy that just basically can't be beaten as long as you execute on it with the right number. Like if your actions permitted are high enough, right? If you can execute on the strategy well enough, that is the strategy that is optimized for the rule set.
Yep. And like specifically for StarCraft, it is a good example because the last balance patch, the last time that they tweaked anything was 2001.
Yeah.
So now it's been 21 years with the exact same rule set. and it evolves year over year. Like I could beat the pros from 2002 because of what I know. Like not only does the rule set not change, and not only does the game still evolve from there, or like the strategies and what works and what doesn't work evolve, but the overall um, skill floor has just went up.
Yes.
Um, which, which I think is like super interesting. And you still have things that end up happening where it's like, oh, like that was a crazy strategy. I've never seen that before. Game 7 of the finals, he pulled it off, and we'll never see that again. Because it worked because it was a surprise in that specific meta right then.
Yeah.
And everything had to align for him to pull it off. And it's true. Like the meta doesn't shift. That was just a really cool highlight reel thing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So do you believe there is a point, years in the future, maybe decades possibly, where StarCraft is effectively a solved ecosystem, right? Like a solved problem, where it's like, this is, and maybe it's like a rotating, right? Like you can win with any of these 3 strategies, but these are the 3 strategies, and then it's all just a matter of how well you execute it against that strategy.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, that's fascinating. Why? I want to know why.
Because the rule set doesn't change, but the number of, because it's real time, the number of decisions and choices that can go into anything is going to consistently be changing. Because I felt that StarCraft was figured out like 5 times in my life, and these are pros who dedicate their life. They live in a house with other pros,
Yeah.
and they just play StarCraft. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like even right now, like it's all, so much of it when you get into it is predicated on the fact that uh, I see what they're doing. I know what I'm doing. I can't stop that because there's a 95% chance I'll lose and only a 5% chance that I'll win. So instead of going for that strategy, right, there's almost like a gentleman's agreement of like, if you're both playing standard in the meta right now, just there's moments when you could probably attack and kill them, but no one's really expecting you to do that. So if you had like, these are the top 3 strategies, right, it would just take one person to be like, well, I'm not going to follow any of that advice, I'm just going to attack through this.
Yeah.
And maybe 90% of the time they stop it with that strategy, but 10% of the time they're still going to lose, right? Because there's just like there's limits to, it's not like something like chess or Go, where there's like a limited move set, right? There's an unlimited move set within a set stage of rules, and even in those stage of rules, there's still bugs, right, and glitches that you can perform that people are still discovering.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's so maybe where I was going with this. I think it's still potentially viable, but for maybe different. So I'll say this. It may not ever get to a point where it is a solved problem, but it is a venue, a fixed rule set is a place for constant optimization with a rising floor, like skill.
Yeah, and I would say that we're pretty close to that. Like all of the matchups, there's a standard way to play, and that hasn't really shifted a ton. Yep. Like it's more like small optimizations over a complete shift in the play style.
And so this now is the parallel that I'll draw. The economy, the capitalist society that we live in has a standard set of rules, and the rules can change. The rules do change, but only sort of at the micro level. At the macro level, the rule set hasn't changed for generations. And what we've done in optimizing that rule set generation after generation, we've gotten better at accomplishing what the rule set sets out to do, and we've raised the floor for participation. You can really only compete at the macro level if you're a millionaire, if you've inherited your fortune, if you've whatever. And what the rule set sets out to do is concentrate value at the top. And so ultimately, like, that's kind of a problem, right? Like we're now discovering at the scale of humanity that we exist at that rule set and the outcome of constant refinement, iteration, and optimization on that rule set, the ultimate goal and outcome that it produces is maybe not what we set out wanting.
Yeah, and I think technology plays a huge part in that too that we weren't ready for. I think a lot of things work at the scale of human output, right? Um, I mean, from our experience together, like looking at the platform that's built at Workiva, right? There's a there's so much headroom for scale, right? Provided it's humans entering the data, right?
Yeah,
But then you open it up to be able to programmatically add the data, and all of a sudden you have a whole different level of problem. And then so I would say like the stock market's like that too. You have like these like buying and trading software stuff like that that's just like it's hyper optimized that wouldn't be a problem if it was just guys on the floor still waving their tickets, right?
yeah,
You have a huge amount of value and investment going into places based on growth rather than the output of a product.
yeah,
Um, there's just like it's still it has worked so far, but the fundamental system, I don't know that it was sat down and thought about like, well, one day there'll be technology companies that can do 1 billion operations a second,
right,
right? It was
yeah,
more based, and I'm very passionate about this because the story I told you earlier about like I have a friend who owns a store here, who's now competing against like these larger stores and stuff like that, and he's like, it doesn't make sense. The only thing he took over from his father, and the only thing that he could do, right, where he's seen a lot of success, is actually get like marketing his own brand and having a marketplace on Amazon. And like some of that was pandemic driven because no one could go to the store anyway.
yeah,
But from that, he looked at it and he's like, for me to like physically bring the inventory in, sort it, put it on display, price it, and then sell it to at most 70,000 people if every single person comes to my store and she's St. Marie, compared to just the volume of people who need socks, dress shirts, ties, like whatever it is. He's like, I can't compete. I cannot compete, but I can get a piece of that, and my business can stay viable, right? It's like about survival, not
yeah.
even thriving at this point.
Well, and so then that sort of begs the question of, in that system, that rule set where the companies that win are usually exploitative and like how do you get to a place working within the system, working within that rule set? How do you get to a place where you make something like the 4 day work week the norm?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew that. Then I get there. I think.
Damn it!
I
I
also think.
wanted you to have the
I
answer.
know. I think there's also different stages of company, and I don't know. Because when I think about it, like I'm very, very for the 4 day work week. 4 day work week right now. Uh, I want the time with my family. I think it's a better way to work. Um, if I had an idea, right, and I'm like, no, this idea is going to be big, and I have a network of people now. Oh my gosh, I have the capital. Like I'm going to do a startup. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? I wouldn't be working 4 days a week. Like I would be putting in more, but it's also because like it's an investment in an idea that I have. The payoff is way bigger than anything I could get as an employee. So I don't know. Like it's super complicated, and
well,
I,
and
I I think it's really hard. I think it's really hard to be like we talk about tech leadership, right? I find it hard enough to like lead a team or a number of teams, compared to like leading a company, right? I thought about this too. Even when you think about someone like Bezos, right, amassing all this wealth, right, and then you think about all the levels down. You think about how terrible it is for like the warehouse workers, and it's not great. Like it's an example of like someone accumulating like way too much wealth. But if I try to be empathetic and I think about like where he's at leading this company, right? I think about what happened when Netflix lost subscribers for the first time in 10 years, and their stock tanked, right? So as Bezos is leading that company, he always needs to be growing. He needs those margins to continue going there. And when he's looking at it, like how does he feel when he has what, like 400,000 people relying on him in some way, shape, or form for their employment?
Yeah.
And like I just it's not just billionaire bad. It's like it's complex, and like we built this systems where like so many things rely on each other, and people are just operating within the rule set that they have. And after a certain point, there's not a lot of choices without looking like an extreme outlier or losing a ton of your value. I think the most inspiring thing I saw recently was it's a sports company. Is it he just gave away his company? Is it Patagonia? Is that
That sounds right.
yeah? And I don't know how you would ever expect. I don't know how you'd expect everyone to do that. Yeah, Patagonia. But like he gave the company away, and he gave it to like a number of like different trusts that would like help improve the planet, right? It wasn't given away to like another person that could just take it over and do whatever they wanted with it. It was like, this is what I want to happen with my money and with my company, and he's still providing the services that made him rich. um, but he just took the wealth out of the individual and is like investing in climate change and the environment and workers' rights and stuff like that. Which, I mean, that's an option, but I can't see everyone doing that.
Well, and there's two things in what you've said that I'll pick out here to comment on. One is that like it's not as simple as like billionaires bad, right? Like that's the rule set creates Bezos, right?
Yeah,
Like this is a game. It has rules. It has winners and losers. The rule set is what creates a Jeff Bezos. And if you don't want to have a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk, you got to change the rule set. But the other thing, and this kind of coming back to the table stakes, again, the parallel between this and other games is that, like you just said, maybe you could do something about this if you had enough wealth and power to be somebody that was running a company, but you can't otherwise. Like we feel powerless to really make any kind of meaningful change to the system without having that, without being at that position where you're a player.
yeah. There's also, there's the rule set, right? And then I think this goes into like what I was saying earlier about like it's not going to be figured out for Starcraft. I don't think like we can't figure out the rule set of capitalism 100%. Like yes, it creates the Bezoses, creates the Musks. What I what I want to get away from is kind of the hero worship of those people,
Mm-hmm.
and saying like, well, they worked hard to get there, they made the right decisions. They were also very lucky. There's a lot of luck in all of the decisions they make and all the hard work that they put in, right? Things had to fall in just the right place at just the right time for it to go there.
Yeah.
If you could have a computer that simulated, like, let's say the 1900s up till the present, right? You start at the same spot. If you run that, 100,000 times, maybe Musk and Bezos are there like once, twice. You know what I mean? Someone's in that position, but
Yes.
it's not necessarily them every single time.
Yeah.
Um, it is, and that always stuck out to me as something that I learned like in tech was like it wasn't. They were very much focused on it's not just the right idea. It was the first time I ever heard ideas are meaningless, right? You need ideas, capital, follow through, and luck.
Yeah.
Like it still needs to be the right time to do that. And it's just like it's not. I'm okay with there being a system, and I understand the system is complicated and it's very hard to change the whole system. I I get irked a little bit when we treat it like it's a meritocracy,
You're right.
um, because yeah, I'm not arguing that people worked hard. I'm not arguing that I've worked hard to get where I am. I mean, I told you my whole story today and everything like that. I'm also extremely lucky. I'm extremely grateful. The right things happened at the right time, and I could not be in this position right now. And I could have worked just as hard or worked harder. And it's just, I don't know. I think people need to appreciate that when they get there. And I don't think that's why I don't think that anything there's like here's the 10-step program to being successful,
Yeah.
right? I don't think there's a perfect
Step
formula
one
for
is
that.
luck.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some of it is like luck about where you're born and the color of your skin and what neighborhood you grew up in and the access to education and things that you were given, right? Like, yeah, yeah. So it's always really tone deaf when somebody's like, "I earned my whatever." It's like, okay, I don't like you said. I'm sure you worked really hard,
Yeah.
but
And there's even like I've been learning a ton about I don't know nearly enough still, but about like women in tech, women in the workplace in general, women in society. As a straight white guy, I've had it as easy as it could possibly be, and I've thought a lot about things. So it's like, well, I should be a leader. I've always gravitated towards that leader position, even at like varying levels of work. But if I was female, would I have just been like bossy or troublesome or like you know
as
in the
far as
way?
like how you were viewed,
Yeah, how I was
yeah,
viewed.
yeah,
Would
yeah,
I
yeah,
like I think everything that I've read, like I wouldn't have been as successful with the attitude that I took towards it.
oh
Whereas like I
yeah,
was seen as a leader, right?
right,
But like you change anything about single white male or straight white male,
yeah,
and I irk someone the wrong way, or like I shouldn't be speaking out of turn,
uh huh,
or someone else takes credit for it. I don't know.
yeah,
I don't want to get too much into that because I don't know enough to speak on it, but I'm very grateful. Like you said, like there's a ton of things that go into being born in Canada. Um, uh,
yeah. Raleigh and I spoke a lot about that in the last episode, and yeah, I'm with you on that. Where it's like I recognize that I have a lot of privilege, and I also recognize that I don't even recognize all the ways in which I have a lot of privilege.
yeah,
Um,
we did an example at our developer conference this week. It was like a boat privilege, and like the more things that you identify with, the more things you said, yeah, that's me, right? The more privileged you were. And there's like a lot of people in my office were like high 30s out of 40, like very, and things you'd never think of, right? I had caught COVID that day, so I don't remember all the categories. I kind of just went to sleep, but it was definitely something where, like, when we were talking about it after, like, everyone was shocked by how many points of privilege they actually had.
yeah. I'll ask this question, and then maybe we can kind of wrap things up. But as a leader, um, how does that impact your leadership decisions and how you treat uh, your teams, and recognizing both your position and their positions, and like how I guess how does privilege play into the dynamics in leading your team?
It um, forces me, and it's something I'm still trying to get better at, but it forces me to stop and look at the status quo even when things are going really well, I guess. An example would be, when we're going through a project, we've fallen into a cadence, right? And in that cadence, you end up having like, oh, well, like this person is the tech lead, so they're making all the technical decisions, right? Finding a voice for people who disagree or keep bringing things up and making sure that it's not just swallowed in the fact that, well, things are going well, why would we change anything? You know what I mean? Like, it's not, you don't know the perfect solution. Even if you're not making like huge sweeping changes, right? Can it be better? And leaving things to be like, I find your team should be a community. Like, trying to find more of like um, their inputs to feel heard, right? All of their inputs should matter. And that comes down a lot to like decisions end up being, we will have a discussion around it. And through that, as the leader, I've also decided that I will make the decision and I'll be responsible and accountable for whatever that decision is. But it's led to a lot of getting rid of hard policies, I would say, that has really felt good for the team, because I find that the answer is like, well, what do we do when we're doing a ticket like this and X happens? And the answer almost always is it depends,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you make the answer like, well, absolutely, that's scope creep. You increase the effort points on the ticket and make it a bigger ticket and make sure you record that endurance. Like, okay, well, that might be right if you're almost done. Other times it might be like, well, you know, complete what you have there and spawn the 5 other tickets for the new work that we found. You know what I mean? And maybe parallelize that across the team. Or maybe sometimes like it's almost done, do nothing, we learn from it, right? But if you'd chosen any one of those 3 policies, 2/3 of the time it's going to feel wrong. So it mostly comes down to like changing a lot of them to like, well, bring it to stand up, let's talk about it, and let's decide what to do. If it was something that we could automate to that level of having a policy for everything that ends up happening, we wouldn't need to hire creative, smart people to solve the problems. It's so trusting in the people, and also um, making it clear what people are responsible for, but really treating it like a community, trying to like, I think humans work better as a group, as a collective. Um, and that has been the best part of this year, has been going back to that, I would say, and taking that. And it included me as a leader becoming much more involved. I had almost like taken too much of a step back, relying on my tech lead, relying on my leadership team, like whatever it was. I need to be involved enough to be a part of those conversations so that they have confidence in me taking responsibility for the decision. Um, so yeah, engage leadership, making sure that everyone can like talk about the problem and um, figure out what to do next. And at the very least, maybe everyone's not happy all the time, but everyone understands how we got there, and it never feels like um, it's dictated from above, or that it's tone deaf, or that they didn't at least have their say, right? And I can't believe how often I've involved people in discussions now, even with other teams, and they're like, "Well, why isn't this happening?" And Workiva's large now, right?
Right.
So I'm not going to go into specifics like why don't we have X functionality, right, in our development cycle. I'll be like, well, someone's working on that, and they'll be like, okay, well, any updates? And there's no like real public updates, but I've been booking time with the engineer who asked and the VP or the director, whoever is in charge of that project, and it takes a half hour. And we sit down, and I'm like, hey, like, what are your concerns about us not having this functionality? Kind of like, where are we at? And they get to say their piece. Usually takes like 5 minutes or 2 minutes. Like they just wanted to, and they're like, and then you get the whole story from the person. Like, well, like we're in this. Like cost is a factor, procurement's a factor, the company's a conflict of interest. Like whatever it is. Like when you're trying to like get some functionality in, and we leave, and the state of things hasn't changed necessarily, right? But they're like, well, I know that they're working on it. That's good enough. They, it's like creating
The
the
state of the project hasn't changed, but the state of the individuals, their buy-in, their feelings
yeah,
has.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like forcing empathy between parties.
I love I love that. Because that's so like antithetical. Like forcing empathy is like
Yeah,
if you can figure out how to force empathy, somehow you've like short circuited it. Maybe it's not even called empathy at that point, but
I operate under like a fundamental um, belief that everyone's doing their best,
mm-hmm.
and that allows me to roll with a lot of things that are like changes or like situations that happen. And I guess the biggest thing I've been combating by trying to like, it's not forcing empathy, but it's just getting people to talk to each other, is letting other people know that that's probably the case. It hasn't blown up in my face yet, where someone is just like, oh no, like I don't care about that, I own it, but I'm never gonna do it, right? So there's the possibility that it gets way worse for me. But overall, just being like let's go talk to the people that are doing it, and it's not that people don't care, it's not that people have more important things to do all the time. It's just that there's almost always a good story as to how we got there, um, and people are working their best within a rule set that um, we don't know the whole rule set across every department, every person, every company that you interact with.
If there's an interesting to me sort of another through line in your narrative, it's that despite being somebody that has been repeatedly exploited, you are still an advocate for openness and vulnerability. And I really appreciate that about you.
Thanks. I just, I don't know. Maybe it's like a reaction to which I never want to be the exploiter, because I know how it feels like on the other side. And I also like, I just think I knew so many people that were so like they were just good people and they got crushed by the system, um, of whatever it was. And then talking to like people like the owners of the restaurant afterwards, right? They're just trying to have a successful business, right? And they're up against like insane rent, because they're in a mall. They're up against like food spoilage. Like I oh god, like there's like a dream to like own a restaurant, but my god, it's also a nightmare. It's like
I'm with you. I would love, like owning a restaurant is the kind of thing you do not when it make not to make money, just like as a possession, like so that you can
yeah,
roll
yeah,
in and be like, hey, and like the people, and you're like, yeah, chef special, whatever the chef wants to make, let's like it's that
yeah,
kind of a thing. It's like once you can lose the money of operating a restaurant, then you do it.
yeah. And you had like you still had people, right, that like okay, you fire them, that's fine, but how long were they taking 20 bucks out of the till every night?
Yeah,
Right? Like, and that's just a loss. Like, you shouldn't be operating in margins in which it's like that bad. They were still making money, right? But they had trust issues for a reason,
yeah.
which I get. Like, you know, I don't know. There was definitely a few times that like I punched in like meatballs for $1.99 and like made myself like a pizza. And it was just like, yeah, that's my staff meal for the day. I'll admit that. It's like
Sure.
so not great, not the complete victim. I don't know. I think it's hard. I think life is really hard, and I think that um, everything is complicated. So I try to listen more than anything else because there's no there's no easy explanation, but that's what almost everyone gravitates to. They're like, this is wrong. Like I said earlier, right? Like capitalism doesn't work because the billionaires have 98% of the wealth or whatever. Like that's a fast, easy statement that people look at. People who aren't billionaires, especially, are like, yeah, that makes sense. Like they have way more than me, um, and like that might be a symptom of it, but it's super complicated, right? They're confined in ways that we don't understand as well. Um, because they want their business to continue to be successful. They have all these employees. They might have like um, they have heirs that they want to do well as well, and a lot of it is still theoretical wealth. Like it's like buying power. It's not 300 billion in your bank account where it's just like, yeah, I can retire. It's like if you screw up, right, you can see that drop, you know, by
Yeah.
huge percentage points.
Life is complicated. Easy answers are easy because they lack nuance. Listen more. I
Yeah.
think that's a good message, and I appreciate that.
Awesome. I mean, I had the best part. I don't know. It feels good. I'm gonna toot my own horn a little bit here, but I took the team out, and it had been so long since we'd done anything, mostly because of COVID. Went out, and there's super insignificantly cheap, I guess, to get everyone out. But like immediately, everyone was having a good time, and we were sitting down. We were talking about like some of the things the team's facing, and like what we want to do next. And I was laying out kind of like, well, there's this, and then this is kind of in our way, you know. So and so is working on this, but like these are in motion. And some of the people are like, oh yeah, well I met with so and so with you, Brandon, and yeah, like that's totally going along. And one of the people who's like quiet, heads down, just loves coding, right? Wouldn't expect to even want to come to like the team event, right? You expect them to stick to themselves. He's just like, it got into like management and like how fair it was for the people in the Sioux office, in particular. I just got back, and someone's like, "Ooh, calling out the manager," and he just looked up. He's like, "Yeah, Brandon's management, but I've only ever seen him fight for us, like the team in the office, so it's completely different." And that was like one of the best compliments I think I could ever get. So
Yeah, feels good.
yeah, Sorry, I feel like we're like on many tangents that are not what we said we were going to talk about.
No,
So
honestly, we covered. So I'm looking at my notes here, my paper notes that I jotted down before getting started. And I mean, we've talked a lot about tech leadership. We talked about your background. We talked about the 4-day work week and work life balance and being a community. We talked about Starcraft and esports. Um, honestly, like,
yeah,
yeah, we didn't talk about sort of the content creation economy and paying for entertainment in sort of niche interest areas. If you want, we could hit that.
did we get enough on your leadership thing? I don't know. I feel like it's weird to just talk about tech leadership with you. But
I mean, I'm nerdy about leadership. I love talking about it. But listen, this is the thing about this format that I love is like there's a flow to it, and it should be natural. Like this is a conversation, and wherever it goes, it goes. And sometimes that's to some weird fucking places, and
yeah,
sometimes it's not, and that's fine. But I love all the stories that you shared. Thank you for sharing your stories, and I'm happy
okay.
with it. This is
Well,
it's whatever it is, like if you're like, nah, let's talk about X, Y, and Z still, I'm game. Let's go.
yeah. I want to thank you for having me on. There is one thing that I want to touch on that I was reading through. It's like the hardest decision I've had to make as a leader,
Yes.
and it was 100% having to manage someone out of the company um, who
Explain
I
that.
really liked, who I
Explain that
really liked.
wording. Managing someone out
So
of the
manage them out
company.
of the company instead of like necessarily um, firing them outright, right? You have reasons and you have data and you back it all up, um, but you go through a process of just basically you make it like it would be better for them to search for a better fit for their job somewhere else, and that felt terrible. And the reason I bring that up is definitely the hardest thing that I had to do, hardest decision I had to make. And it wasn't the individual's fault that we got there. Kind of the rule set in the company had changed from the time we hired them until the time that they were made. And I really liked them as a person. And one of the things that I learned there, this is going to come back to something I said earlier, it was engagement. I wasn't engaged enough with the team. I wasn't in there day to day to be able to push back on the narrative of like this person needs to go, and that felt awful because I felt helpless. And like the thing that I've learned from that, I would say, is that there shouldn't be any surprises, and I will probably never do that again because if I can't outright fire the person, it feels manipulative.
Yeah.
And looking back, I regret it. It's one of those things where it's like, and they're happy. I've kept in touch. They're happy. They and the format of like where we're at, um, or where Workiva's at as a company didn't fit with the work that they wanted to do. Um, but I wish we could have got there more organically. And I wish that I had the confidence to be able to like tell someone, like maybe this isn't the right place for you, because I always felt like I couldn't say that as a manager. I always felt like I had to like, you know, defend the company. Um, and I do to a certain extent. I understand that, like I'm employed by the company, but at the same time, when I'm looking at it, like they're people, right?
Right.
What's best for the person?
I think that's one of the position you've just articulated is one of the most difficult things about being a manager, which is that you are both beholden to the company, but part of, I mean, everybody is, right? Like the you need to do what is in the best interest of the company for the sake of everybody continuing to be employed. But at the same time, your charge at the company is to take care of these people. Like you have people that are in your care, and you do care about them. And sometimes the conflict that's brought in is for the sake of the company, this person that you care about, like you need to do something or take some action that will in some way bring harm to them.
Yeah.
I've had to fire people too, and some of those, like I'll say, like that leaves a mark on your soul sometimes. Like
Yep.
that's and like I'm not religious, like I don't mean that in like that sense. It's just like that
No, it stays with you.
it
It's like
does.
I think about it probably more than the individual does. Is almost how it feels.
They just kind of
Like,
go like Brandon's an asshole or Matt's an
yeah,
asshole, and they just
exactly.
like
Yeah,
they get to have their moment of being angry and they walk away. They're the ex that gets to like tear up your hoodie and throw away your CD
yeah,
collection, and then they move on, and you're just like, and it's not like I don't mean to say that like there, that we should have like I've been fired and there was a point where I was like, yeah, fuck that person, and like whatever, both sides are valid. I'm not trying to
yeah,
say that like that we shouldn't have sympathy or feel bad for or have empathy for people that get fired in that situation. We absolutely should. I'm saying that there is a side of it from the employer side that it is often unseen and can also be very damaging to the agents of the company that have to carry out its mission, which in that case is sometimes unsavory.
yeah. And it's I just think like the experience I went through, right? I want to be more honest moving forward. And this was years ago now, but it was like, and I think I have been. I mean, it was a bit of a different situation because there's an intern. Um, and I don't want to give too much away, but it was just like I've talked a lot about how everyone needs to trust everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was going through it, and I got some like troubling feedback first of all about like overall um, ability. And I sat down. I was like, okay, well, like let's sit down and go through this. And we went through it. I'm like, okay, you understand it. That's fine. Just like go in your ID, write it down. And then they went and they did that. I'm like, how's it going? Like, oh, it's working. It's good. I think it's almost ready for code review. And I look at it, and there's no way. Basically, it was an indenting issue, right? But there was no way they were getting to the code that they wrote, right? And I saw that right away. I'm like, are you sure it works? He's like, yep, I tested it. I'm like, well, what about like in the false case? They're like, oh yeah, no, it works both ways. I'm like, okay, show me. Runs it, errors. It's just like, oh, it was just working. I'm like, okay. And it was one
Was
of
it
those things
now?
where like it came down, and like I just taught, and I was like I talked to them like that day. I booked time. I'm like, I don't know like whether it was like something that like you hit tab after you're talking and you did test it, but like to me it looks like you weren't testing it, and I just need you to be very explicit when you move forward, like about where you're at, and everyone needs to trust everyone. I can't have like I don't care what the answer is. The answer can be I have no idea,
Right.
as long as it's not a lie.
Right.
Um, and immediately they just went to like are there other non-engineering opportunities at Workiva? You know what I mean? Like, and it's just like, well, like this isn't working out. Like, and I know like you know um, when your contract's up because there's like 3 weeks away, and instead of 2 weeks, I'm like it's just gonna be it. But it wasn't. I hope they didn't walk away being like, oh, I wasn't like smart enough or I didn't have the ability to do it. It was like just like you weren't in a place where you were ready to learn how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of like the last thing that I said. I'm like, um, they had a great attitude, got along great with the team and stuff like that. Like it's, you know, this particular skill set where I think you can improve. And secondly, being really open to learning moving forward. Don't, you got to tell me the truth about what's going on with you, not what you think I want to hear.
Right.
Because I can't coach you if you're telling me, oh, well, I mean, I guess everything's going fine because he's saying everything I want to hear. Like everyone asks a ton of questions. Everyone's overwhelmed. Everyone all of a sudden feels it's like we talked about at the first, right? Like tech was a whole new ball game. Um, if you're still trying to hold on to like, yeah, I'm going to always say the right thing or I'm going to do really well, it's not going to work.
Right.
Because that's actual imposter syndrome, I think, to a certain extent. When you have no vulnerability towards that,
Yeah.
you will get found out in that
Yes.
case.
Because you
But
are
if
an
you,
imposter.
yeah, yeah. But if you have vulnerability and you just feel like you need to learn a lot more before you get there, and you're really honest about it, and the last part of that is you put in the effort to what I always say, I'm like feel free to ask any question you want. Do your best not to ask the same question twice.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's kind of like my first intro to like interns and new people that were joining and stuff like that. And it's not, you're not failing if you ask the same question twice.
Mm-hmm.
But like the idea there is like, especially if you ask the same question the second time, maybe write down the answer. Like it's like, you need to be growing and learning. And that's, not to be valid as a person, but to be successful here in this environment on the team that we're working on. That's what we're asking of you.
Yeah.
So
I think that firing is the hardest challenge in leadership. And how you handle it says a lot about people. I think that leaders specifically, right? And honesty in that interaction and the interactions leading up to it, I think is very difficult. In some cases, it all depends on the circumstances, right? But like, I have a lot of respect for people that handle that with honesty. And I have a lot of negative feelings, we'll just say, for people that don't.
yeah.
But I suppose that's just how it goes.
Like, and there's situations that can come down, right? And I think that those, nothing should be a surprise is what I kind of stick to. And I stick to that to the point right now where like if it came down from the CTO, it'd never come down to the CTO, but just like not at my company, just as a theoretical.
Mm-hmm.
Like you absolutely need to let go of X on your team because of this reason, right?
Yep.
If that reason wasn't illegal, like they would have to fire me too. And that's kind of like the pact that I have with like my team. Um, I might get in trouble, like I might be held responsible for it, but I'm not going to. I know where everyone's at, and I'm not going to like protect myself because it's easier. And I think if that could happen at every level of leadership, um, I think it'd be. I'm not saying that any like the outcomes would necessarily change, but there'd
Mm-hmm.
be less surprises or things that feel unfair. And the hard part that I'm noticing, even as I'm growing and getting to, having more people or more types of people rather than just ICs under me, um, is that it's very hard to stay engaged at the point where you can make that. It's easy when it's 5 people that I've worked with the entire time in the same location,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's harder when you start having completely different teams and they're all over the place. And it really falls apart if in one of those chains someone's not aligned because you lose that honest feedback coming all the way from the bottom to the top.
Well, because dishonesty is usually the shield for fuckery.
Sure.
Like, like without getting into too many specifics here, like I'll just say, when I was fired, I was given a reason that I knew was dishonest,
Right.
and but that was it. Like, they weren't going to tell me what the real reason was. I couldn't
Right.
probe further. I couldn't. It was just like, okay, I guess this is happening. But the fact that it was dishonest in its execution left me with all kinds of questions about like, I spent weeks. I mean, I still kind of wonder. Like, I, it took me probably a week to try and even put together with some amount of constantly racking my brain, going over interactions over the past, months, weeks, days of like what could have happened, why was this decision made, from whom did it come, and so the dishonesty from the perspective of somebody on the other side of that then comes with a lot of mental baggage. Like eventually you just have to kind of go like, well, fuck them and move on. But it's very difficult. And I would imagine for the person who had to fire me, who had to give that dishonest reason, that probably haunts him a bit too.
Yeah.
And yeah, it sucks.
No, I mean it's really hard, and it's like I was kind of dancing around it, but that's like exactly what I was thinking about. Like there's just there, you know, everyone needs to be engaged so that nothing should be a surprise. I hate that. I hate that it's a surprise.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's been situations that like felt sudden, but when I had the info, I'm like, that's not a surprise. When I talk to the individual after, they're like, I get it. I don't like it, but I get it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that should be the case. I think that's what like it just makes me want to really avoid that in the future
Yeah.
as much as I can. So, any even now, I don't know. Any surprise feels bad. Like,
Surprises are usually not good things.
nah, we were even little things. We had offered help to another team basically, and I'd been talking to the manager. You know what I mean? And um, my tech lead was off for a week, and then I was off for the week after. I'm like, well, I'm not going to bug him like while he's off. You know what I mean? By the time we got back, kind of the decision was made. We were planning the project. He's like, wish you would have told me. I'm like, yeah, like I have to go out of my way. Like it wasn't even a negative thing, but I could tell in that moment like I had lost a little bit of trust in that person that I rely on like quite a bit, just because they were surprised. It's like, no, I got to be ahead of that stuff. You know what I mean? It's not just the big things, right? It's always like it's that open communication uh, to everyone that is pertinent to. I think.
Yeah. Yep.
Like I don't know. Even good news. One of the things that I hate the most is like when someone up above me in the chain is like, this is happening, but don't tell anyone because it's not official.
Fucking hate that too.
Right? And it's just like, well, to me, I think that someone above you probably said, don't tell anyone because it's not official, but you decided to tell me anyway. Now I got to sit with it too.
Right.
Like, and even when it's good things, it's just like, well, now I have information, right? And
Yeah.
And people are going to ask about it because it's usually about something that's like a hot topic, right? And it's like, well, what do you know about this? I'm like, I know nothing, and now I'm lying. I hate it. I'm a bad liar.
Well, and the approach that I try to there's two approaches that I've taken to that historically. One is I just as you've articulated, I understand that like the person who told me was probably under those same orders, but then said like, but you're going to be affected by this, so I'm going to tell you. And I just use that same policy all the way down, which is like, okay, well, I shouldn't tell you this, but I'm going to. But you need to keep it a secret now. But luckily, you're the end of the line, and you don't need to. You're not responsible for telling anyone else. Yeah. So, which I mean, that sucks. But that's one strategy. The other is just like then when somebody asks you about it, you can legitimately say, I know the answer to that question, but I'm not allowed to tell you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And that sucks because then people will try to dance around it. They play the 20 questions. Like, can we outline the negative space enough to know like what the shape of it? And you just have to be like, you have to kind of shut that down too.
Well, sometimes there's like there's no point either. Like it's not a secret worth keeping. So I don't understand why there's a restriction on this. It's like we've signed the lease on the new office for the Sault Ste. Marie crew, but it's not finalized, so don't say anything. I'm like, well, you went through like you've signed the lease. We haven't re-signed here, so we're either moving to the new office or we're homeless. Right. Like.
The pointless secrets. Those are the ones that to me are just like expressions of control.
Yeah.
And I don't get it. Yeah.
So anyway, I wanted to touch on like my experience with firing, because I think that's really hard for leaders. I think it's one of the things that like people probably want to avoid the most if they're going into leadership, but like depending on where you're at, it can be like it's one of the most important things you can handle because it is one of the hardest. So I don't know. I did it once. I did it once in a way that I really didn't like, and I want to avoid that moving forward.
I think there's maybe some good closing thoughts there around leadership in general, which is I'll sort of like I'll give a lead in and then I'm curious about your thoughts on it. But um, from my perspective, leadership it is like it's easy to see all the perks of leadership from the outside, right? Like if you're not if you it's easy to sort of see like, oh yeah, this person, like this leader, they travel more and they're like in these all these important conversations and they're the first to know about some of these things and you get paid more sometimes. Uh, but there's a lot of downsides too. There's a lot of difficulty to the job of balancing the two sides of the equation, right? What's right for the entire company, what's right for the team, what's right for the individual, what's right for you. All of that is a very difficult dance. I think it is one of the more difficult things that a person can decide to do. From my perspective, it's also one of the most rewarding. While I've had those experiences of like having to fire people, of being fired, the and everything in between, like that's an extreme bad, right? But like I've also been on the side where I've been able to cultivate and help people grow in their talents, their capabilities, and as people, and that feels really good. And cultivated relationships with people that are things that I treasure. So, all in all, you know, the question that I'd have to you, and I'll lead by giving my answer, which hopefully doesn't sway yours, but I have a feeling we're going to align on this. Is that I think it's worth it if it's something that you like to do. All in all things considered, it's a worthwhile adventure, even though it's difficult. But I'm curious, kind of what your thoughts are, you know, summarily on leadership as a kind of chosen profession.
Yeah, it's at first it was really difficult because you go from having very direct feedback of like lines of code, number of tickets, things like that, that you almost want to fall back to. Um, and you can have like a varying level of feedback too. You could have kind of just someone who believes in you that's giving you like, you're doing well, follow your instincts, you know, keep on keeping on, kind of. And that's not super useful for like someone who's trying to grow. You know what I mean? Like it's reassuring. Um, and then you can have mentors that are very much they give you a false sense of security, right? They take everything that you say, but it never goes beyond that their level, and you end up feeling like you're making meaningful change or meaningful growth, right? But it's kind of just dying in this communication black hole, I guess, to a certain extent. So you're very aligned with like exactly one person, and that doesn't feel great. And then people who really challenge you, who it almost feels insulting at first. It's almost like, well, everyone's told me I was good at this, right? And they're like, well, yeah, there's some things that I think have a lot of potential, but like X, Y, and Z's gotta, you know, be honest with yourself. Can that be better? Um, and I've had like all those types of mentors, and as I went through that, I've grown. Um, it's easy. At first, I really liked the idea of being important. If I'm going to be completely honest, I wanted, I like the idea of like being in the meetings, having
Yes.
like my voice heard, doing the travel stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, but that was the path, that I would be the imposter, because it's not how that's not what I find rewarding about being a leader. It was about getting re-engaged with the team. And you said, there's always the dichotomy between your teammates and the company. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Um, I want to be a representation of my team's culture to the company, not a representative of the company to my team. And having that mindset, goes back to, I think the buzz term is like servant leadership.
Yep.
But it went from like, I find it really rewarding. I also have a personality that I find this rewarding. I don't think it's for everyone. I think you really need to you need to be able to take like a lot of perspectives in. You need to prioritize a whole lot of things that are the most important thing to an individual, because maybe you have like 11 reports and they all care about something different. You got to prioritize and like make sure that everyone understands what their priority comes from. Um, and you need to just live with your decisions. And um, it's like, oh, well, I wish I was the decision maker. I'm like, you hear this at every level. It's like, yeah, you do, and it's really great some of the times, and sometimes it really sucks. Um, but one, like, it started with like really rewarding to help people grow, and like that was like the first phase of leadership. Was like helping an intern grow into a junior, and then like following people through their career, like junior into senior into tech lead, and then helping other people get into leadership was super rewarding. I worked with you on that project. That was super rewarding. That felt great. And watching those people like take your advice and then grow on their own and then be like, wow, they're better at these things than I am now. Right? Like they always had the potential, but like they've grown to the point where like now you're a peer that I want to talk to and get advice from you because you're dealing with a completely different subset of problems and you handled it really well. um, to then looking at like where I live, the office, the people that aren't on my team there, um, the community that we've built, um, just around people who have also left the company now, and then still being able to talk to them and
Yeah.
having that impact on people, um, where like you still meet with them, you talk with them. It's like, yes, at one point you had to talk to me, basically, but no, like a lot of people that I really respect are choosing to, and I think that feels great. And
Yeah.
it's not, I never, I love figuring out problems. I love writing code. I've gotten far away from it, but nothing's been as rewarding as like having people have the like change their lives, especially like where I live, where there wasn't a lot of options for tech, and knowing how it felt for me to grow and be like, oh my god, I can live this life, to be able to open that door for other people is, I don't think there's anything better.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Um, Hang on for a moment after we like stop recording and talk logistics,
Yeah. Yeah.
but just thank you for coming. This has been, I guess, episode 3 of Around the Campfire. And Brandon, it was wonderful talking to you, catching up, getting to know you better. Thanks for sharing your stories.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening. And like I said, I'm not even sure where all the topics went, but I'll be interested in watching it back.
Awesome.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.